All right, good morning. I'm Liz Baxter. I'm the CEO for the North Sound ACH, and I just want to thank you all so much for being here. Before we start with our agenda, I would like to introduce Jim Steinrich, and he is going to introduce the person who's going to welcome us here to Tulalip Land and do a blessing before we get started. So, Jim.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jim Steinrich, and I am the Health System Administrator for the Tulalip Tribes. And I want to introduce Dale Jones. Dale is one of our revered elders with our tribe. He also is one of our critical team members in our diabetes education and prevention program, chronic disease self-management program. Dale is going to open us up with a blessing. But I got to tell you something about Dale. Dale has been, for the last 3.5 years that I've been there as the health administrator, has been an amazing mentor to me to teach me, or at least to try to teach me, the Tulalip ways, the tribal ways. And I really want to honor him this morning by thanking him for mentoring me. So I'd like to introduce Dale Jones.
Good morning. I want to welcome you all here. You know, the Creator gave us the opportunity to come here, safe and sound, and the land that we have, the water, the birds, the fish, the whales. I was reading that in here, how we honor them, and how we honor each other by being here in a multicultural place. You all chose to be here, and I welcome you for that. And, you know, in our native way, we're all brothers and sisters. And we need to educate people more on that, on diversity, how we need to get along. We don't need to be tearing each other down. You know, love, sharing, that's my stepdad from O'Connor. Chester Caillou Sr. used to talk about all the time. My hands are up to the Lummi Nation for being here with their songs. You know, the Creator, as you understand Him, as I understand Him, you know, I pray to the Creator that you have a blessed day here and safe travel home to our families. You know, we need to cherish the air and the water that we have. I don't know how many of you read the paper yesterday. There's going to be a shortage. So we need to pray that we get more water, more rain that people say we live in. But I hope you have a great day. You know, and we need more of this, especially in the diabetes, but it's very rampant in all of our people. Education is the word that we need more of. You know, our ancestors, they didn't have the education that we have and you have, but they were able to understand by sharing what they had, the knowledge that was passed down from the grandmothers and the grandfathers that we all have. So I hope you have a very good day, safe travel, and I love everyone, and we'll see you.
So one of the things that the North Sound ACH and our board and our team have been trying to incorporate is a land acknowledgement statement. So I'm going to read to you what our team came up with. And of course, I have this wish that each of you will try to figure this out within your own organizations. But we begin by acknowledging with humility that the land where we are today is the territory of the people of the Salish Sea. Their presence is imbued in the waterways, shorelines, valleys, and mountains of the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people since time immemorial. This is really important for us, and I shared with a couple of people yesterday that I woke up yesterday morning saying, I am imperfect, because every day there's something that, kind of goes wrong along the way. But trying to translate that into, we've committed to going on a journey, and it's incredibly important to us that you all have agreed to go on this journey with us. The Children of the Setting Sun is helping us with this journey, that John Powell, when he joins us, is helping us on this journey. Because we're all on a journey. We may stumble at times, because I know that I will, but still hope that you will stay committed to being on this journey with us. There's a couple of people I want to introduce before we kind of jump in. So I am hoping that the North Sound ACH team is in the room. If you guys would please stand. Some are standing already. We started a couple of years ago with 3 people, and then it was 2 for a while, and then it was 5, then it was 7, and this year we're actually, because we're in implementation, growing our team. We've got an amazing team, and as you all know, something like today doesn't come together without a whole bunch of people doing the work to make it so. So these are the folks who did all the work. Just want to say thank you to them, if you'll join me in that. Do I have to give you permission to sit? I don't know. Are there any members of the North Sound ACH board in the room? I know Jim is a board member. So if you would please stand. So appreciative of all that you do. Our board, we are a nonprofit corporation, so our board are all volunteers. And they do an amazing amount of work to try and steer this effort of how it is we're going to approach health in the North Sound region. Are there any electives? I just thought I would ask that. I hadn't thought to ask it, but any electives in the room that we need to acknowledge? Not that we need to, but we will. Okay. We do have a couple of electives on our board, and we have partners where some of their leadership are also elected. And the role of cities, counties, other jurisdictions in trying to carry some of this work is also really important to us. So I got asked to just kind of jumpstart, why are we launching a tribal and equity learning series? Why aren't we pulling you all together to talk about all the things that are the metrics that are related to the Medicaid Transformation Project? So I have gotten questions since we first did the Save the Date for May 22nd, like, what about workforce? We don't actually work with these communities. Why are you requiring us to be in this room in order to participate? And we've got a lot of other things that we know are stressors and barriers to the work that you all are doing. We really felt that this was important for our region to start here. And there's a couple of things that I just want to share. And I'm not typically the person who talks about data, but I'm going to start with data. So the first piece, half of the children born in this state are born on Medicaid. If we want to think about how to impact the next generation and the generation after that, we have to realize half of the children born in this state are on Medicaid. What an amazing opportunity that we have if we can figure out how to do preconception, conception, prenatal, childbirth, the early years better. There's an amazing opportunity that we have there. 25% of the people in the state of Washington are on Medicaid. Before the Affordable Care Act, that was about 16%. It's now about a quarter of the people that you interact with, and I don't mean in your 9-to-5 job, but in your grocery stores, when you're at Target, when you're in your faith communities, are people on Medicaid. For our tribal partners, those percentages are much higher. For the 5 counties that we work with, the percentages vary. And they may not vary in total numbers, but for example, Skagit County has a higher percentage of people on Medicaid than any of the other counties in our region. And it's when county commissioners begin to realize 1 in 4 or more than 1 in 4 people in their county are people on Medicaid that they begin to realize this is an incredibly important opportunity for us. The state budget, so the state just passed its budget last week, and we're talking about a growing portion of the state budget that is about Medicaid. This is a huge deal that is impacting our ability to deal with climate change, to deal with water quality, to deal with public education, to deal with other things that are also incredibly important. Medicaid is important to all of us from an economic level to a political level to how it is that we interact with each other. And the last piece is that 40% of the people on Medicaid are people of color. So as we were looking at this data and trying to understand, so why start with equity? It may not be that 40% of the people that you see are people of color, but 40% of the people on Medicaid in the state of Washington are coming from communities of color. This is critical for us to understand how is that we actually design our programs in order to meet that need. So there's 4 things that I probably want to just leave you with to kind of move through the day. So for the North Sound ACH, and I see another board member is just like maybe popped in the room, but we want to be transformative. And so part of what that means is that we're going to do things that you might not agree with. We're going to do things that make you uncomfortable. We're going to do things that are going to force some of you to first react by saying, but we're already doing that. But the reality is we're not going to be transformative because we do the things we're already doing. If that were the case, we would be hitting the kinds of milestones and metrics that have been laid out in front of us. The second is that, if any of you have ever read all of the paperwork behind the Medicaid Transformation Project, we probably have about 200 pages between the agreements between the federal government and the state, the contracts between the state and the ACHs, and they lay out the objectives of this work. And one of the 5 objectives is to advance equity and reduce disparities. There are no measures or metrics that are laid out in any of those documents about how it is that we are going to be measured to see if we've actually done that thing. We know how we're going to be measured around ED utilization, about well-child visits, about homelessness, incarceration, nothing about equity. So North Sound said, we're going to be the place that tries to come up with some tangible metrics around how it is that we advance equity. Our connection with John Powell actually started kind of surreptitiously. We were introduced to the notion of targeted universalism almost 2 years ago. Nicole ended up writing it into our project plan, like everywhere that we could talk about it. And it is this notion that every person should have the ability, and we should create the paths for everyone to reach a goal. That we shouldn't reach goals where we acknowledge from the outset, yeah, some folks won't be able to get there, but a lot of people will, and that's good enough. That we wanted to actually create strategies where everyone had a path to reach the goals that we set up. That's important for North Sound and for our team. And then the last piece is about relationships. And I think the first time that I met with Darrell to talk about what was the North Sound ACH, I said, if at the end of 5 years, the only thing that we do is to get you all working better with each other, with our tribal partners, that will be success. This notion of relationships, doing work differently, realizing the intersections between the hospital, the clinics, community action, fire EMS, the food pantry, et cetera, et cetera. That's the work. We are trying to build some way of connectedness in our community among partners so that it starts to make more sense for the people in our communities when they're trying to access help. This building relationship piece is a core part of our sustainability plan. And I didn't write it up here because I couldn't figure out a way to put it in few words, but I'm going to say that the last piece has to do with the fact that every day in the last 3 years, there has been some type of an assault on human rights, human dignity, whether we're focused on communities of color, we're focused on women, we're focused on, our tribes and ethnic group, or are they actually sovereign nations? I mean, there have just been so many things that have been happening with the intention to divide us so that I'm really glad I'm not them. I'm glad I'm over here and I'm not being attacked yet. But the reality is, so many things are happening that are trying to divide people in this country, and it is critical that we find a way to tie us together, because this is about us. It isn't about some other group. I think that North Sound, and I am new to the North Sound region, so I'm hitting my 3rd year anniversary, has a really unique opportunity to become the place where when people come here, they feel like there's a door open, there's a sense that they belong here, as opposed to they're a visitor and they should leave. That's really the challenge that I put in front of you as we move into this work. Which leads us to today. I am hoping that what you hear in the morning is about those things that connect us rather than separate us. As a team, we don't feel that we can hit the reduced ED utilization, the reduced homelessness, addressing the opioid crisis, or any of those things if we do not start with understanding who are the communities that we serve, and how do we find strategies to actually try to make things better for everyone, not just some. So the notion that we are launching our education, TA, QI, you can put a bunch of letters in there with this, was incredibly important to us and our team. So Jerry Martin's in the room. Where are you, Jerry? We had a meeting for 2 days last August at Everett Community College. You at least, I think, got about a month's notice about this May 22nd date. Last August, we gave partners 2 weeks' notice and said, we're going to spend 2 days at Everett Community College. And before we left, Jerry said, you need to take a picture. And, you know, I'm going to paraphrase the story, and Jerry could probably share it with you later, but, you know, Jerry was at 9/11, and, you know, he was there doing work on the ground and talked about how important it was that you had some way of demonstrating who are the people who are doing this work. And so this is a picture that Jerry took and sent to us, and this is a year ago, and we have a photographer who's going to be coming probably mid-morning. We want to capture some pictures of you all, and I wish that I could just portray you back to yourselves, because you are the work. The ACH team is a small part. We're kind of a hub. We're going to be a connector. We're going to do a lot of things to help advance your work. You are the North Sound ACH. So I am like a person who has quotes. I love Nicole's office because she's always got a quote up on a whiteboard somewhere. And, you know, Albert Einstein, this is a very famous quote that, you know, you probably have seen in a lot of places. And it comes back to this notion of transformation, that we can't use the same tools and the same thinking and the same strategies that created the scenario that we're in to try and help us get out of that. So the cool thing about Google is you can now, like, Google any quote that you're used to using and find out, did Albert Einstein actually say this? And so it's kind of interesting because this isn't exactly what he said. And what he said is much more complicated, but much more profound. So what he said, and I'm going to have to, like, find it. What he said in 1946, what we need is a new type of thinking. It's essential if mankind is to survive and move towards higher levels. We have to start acting and thinking differently than how we have kind of moved through the last 40, 50, 100 years to where we are today. We planned this event, and for those of you who are, like, familiar with event planning, we got stunned every time we found out that, you know, like a pitcher of water would cost $2.50 per gallon. And so we reached out to our health plan partners. So I just really want to ask you to join me in thanking Coordinated Care, Community Health Plan of Washington, and Molina Healthcare, because they pitched in to help us so that you weren't going from 8:30 till 3:30 with, like, some tangerines and crackers. So please, thank you. So here's the day. We did kind of an interesting thing. So most of you in this room are our contracted implementation partners, but we do have some guests in the room who are going to be joining us just for the morning. And it's going to be fascinating for us because we've never actually had to do this, but when we break at lunch, we are going to be saying goodbye to our morning folks and handing them a lunch and hoping they escort out the door, because the afternoon is really for our implementation partners. But we have added some folks for the morning because not everybody who has been engaged with the ACH ended up being an implementation partner. And we have just some critical partners that have shaped our work, who are going to continue to be partners. They've been part of our capacity building strategies, that we want to make sure that they are actually on this journey with us. So we're going to start with Darrell and the team from the Children of the Setting Sun. We're going to take a break. John Powell will come up at about 10:45. He has some planned remarks, but really we've left quite a bit of time for some dialogue with him. We'll break for lunch. We're then have breakout sessions, one in this room, and we're going to describe the breakout sessions kind of at the end of lunch. Our goal is that you're out the door and back in that glorious I-5 traffic by 3:30. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because I have driven through this area at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. There's no predictability as to whether we're letting you out for traffic or free-flowing cars. So, but our goal is to get you out early so you're not trying to leave here at 5 o'clock. Thank you. Really appreciate you being here. And I'm going to now kind of turn this to Darrell. You have on your agenda kind of a brief bio about Darrell. I encourage you to go to Children of the Setting Sun's website. And I hope that Darrell doesn't mind me saying this, but you know, there is a team of people at Children of the Setting Sun, and I'll let you describe kind of that team and who's doing the work there. But we just are really fortunate to have kind of created this opportunity to partner with Children of the Setting Sun, and look forward to them challenging us and learning along the way. So please join me in welcoming Daryl Hilaire. Oh, these are really tiny. I'm sorry? Are you going to do the clicker? Oh, you most certainly may.
OCM, Nisjalicha, CM, Kate Deluxe on the snap, Shaklami son, Ait Squachio. On behalf of the Lummi Nation people, my mother and my aunt and my uncle, we are very fortunate and welcome to be here with you. We are honored to be standing on the Stahobes people's territory, the Tulalip tribes. We feel welcome and loved, and we come with open arms. And it is our way, the Lummi Nation way. We always open with a prayer. This prayer is only to uplift you, to call our ancestors in, the people that have paved the way, that have taught us. You know, our elders teach us you never change nothing and you never add nothing, what we taught you. So it is our way that we open up with a prayer. I want to thank my close brother, Darrell, that said a prayer. Now I want to offer up a song just to uplift anybody's heart that had a tough morning. You know, you have to deal with kids in the morning, the traffic. We just hope that, you know, you had a safe trip here, a safe trip home, and you find your home the way you left it. So this time I'm going to share this song. I share this song quite often, and I think it's only right. It's a West Shore Princess song, and my little niece, you know, I work in the crime victims service, and she's a survivor of sexual assault. She's not a victim, she's a survivor, and we like to call them survivors because every day she gets up, she goes along life even though she's been through those traumatic issues. So I'm going to share this song now.
Aiscochiel, good morning. Satsumtum Sunasnat, my name is Daryl Hilaire. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming and spending some time with us so that we might be able to share our story with you. And we know that we often must learn our history together, and those things that define us by our history, we know that in that history there's a lot of healing work that needs to be done. And that's what we're on, when Liz talks about a journey, she talks about the healing journey. And every one of us has that in us. It's innate in us as human beings. We create and dissolve and recreate every day. Our cells do that. Our relationships do that. Our love for ourselves is all within that process. And we'll talk a little bit about our rights today, our rights as tribal people. But I think more importantly, we need to talk about the responsibilities that go along with those rights. And I think each and every one of us as United States citizens need to understand a little bit more deeply about our responsibilities to one another that are outside of government, that are outside of the current mandates, this whole thing about hatred and divisiveness. We have a responsibility to address that. And I want to share with you a message that I received this weekend. I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning Saturday, and I flew to New York, Manhattan, spent the night, hopped on the bus because I missed my train up to Syracuse, and I attended a dinner up there for an elder from the Six Nations Iroquois, Onondaga chief, faith keeper. And his name is Oren Lyons, and if you want to write that name down, Orenlyons, I think you'll understand why I was so compelled to do that, to go up there and attend the dinner for him on Sunday night, and then hop on the bus. I made the train this time by like 2 minutes, and came back down to New York and hopped on the plane to come home, and got home at 1 o'clock in the morning yesterday, I think. But Oren left some instructions for us. He said, change values for survival. That was his message. That is my responsibility to take what he said out of all the things that were said over that 3-hour ceremony. That's what he concluded with. Change values for survival. And he's talking about climate and climate change, but he's also talking about our relationship. We want our relationships to grow and to be nurtured and to survive into the next generation. So that was, I'm meeting that responsibility now by saying that to you now. So that's the instructions. And we're here today, Children of the Setting Sun Productions. We're a nonprofit. And we were invited in by ACH, by Liz and her team, to come and share a little bit about tribes and the history of tribes and how perhaps tribal governments and tribal agencies can work with all of you. And we felt that that was a great opportunity to do 3 things. Recognize those health disparities in our communities, the tribal communities, and be of some assistance to you all and your tribal partners through education. We also think it's important that we share our values a little bit with you. Values that are not going to be learned in this room today, but values that are going to be learned when we walk together, and we create a better life together. And we learn from that walk that there's some values that we share, and there's some values that we can grow. And then the third opportunity, I think, was this whole idea of equality and justice is really important to understand, because some of us carry blind spots in our thinking, that we think everything is equal, and that this is a just world. And we know for sure that it's not. So if we understand that there's these misunderstandings, we equate wellness together. And we can shake hands and say that we're going to work on these things together. So Children of the Setting Sun Productions is, we've been around for almost 3 years now. And I say that to people, we've been around for 3 years, but we've been in existence for over 100 years. Children of the Setting Sun was formed by my great-grandfather. It's my sister, Penny Carol Hilaire, great-grandfather. My nephew, TJ's great-great-grandfather, who took it upon himself to form this dance group back in 1920 through the 1930s until he died in mid-1930s. And that original dance group included my father, his grandson. And he felt a need to do that because growing up, my great-grandfather, who at 10 years old, he got in a canoe with his father, Satsumton, and they left the Lummi homeland, and they got in their canoe, and they came down to Mukilteo, which is just a few miles from here. They traveled all the way from a place located next to Bellingham in the middle of winter. And they felt compelled to do that because the United States government wanted to enter an agreement with them to exchange land, our land, this Coast Salish land, for other rights, for healthcare and education and compensation for the land given up and the villages that were to be burned down. And they felt compelled to do this because all around them at that time, there was, there were people dying from smallpox. And there were people that were acting very strangely from the introduction of alcohol. And there was a diminishing amount of salmon. So the old people thought, well, we better get together and figure this out, because these people that are coming into our homeland, there's more and more of them. And we need to make some adjustments to our lifeways so that we can have a good place for our kids to grow up. So they did that. And they went down to Mukilteo, and they entered into discussions about a treaty with the tribes in this area. And some of those tribes signed that treaty, and some didn't. But we want to think about that. Before we became reservations and before we became tribes, we were actually families first. And these families became villages. And then the villages became tribes. And that was all threatened by these people coming into to our homeland, your ancestors. And so why were they coming, under what authority were they doing this, and what was their intention, And I think you think about manifest destiny and what that means, and what rights come from that very statement, manifest destiny. It's that they felt that it was their born right to do that, to come here and exercise those rights under manifest destiny. Means that, for one example is that if you're not Christian, you're less than human. And under that authority, then, those that are less than human have no rights. So that's what was happening. And so we felt the need to go to Mukilteo to sign this treaty. And the 8 tribes that are in this Puget Sound ACH are Tulalip and Swinomish, Upper Skagit, Saxawatle, Nooksack, Samish, Stillaguamish, and Lummi. And some of us were able to sign that treaty. We were afforded full treaty rights, but some weren't. It was a real sloppy process because it was really a land grab. And some tribes had to go back and get recognized under executive order, which is different than a treaty tribe. And still today, there are some of these 8 tribes that are still trying to gain full recognition. And what does full recognition mean? Well, full recognition, full federal recognition is those rights granted under treaty. And that's really important when we say, well, you're a treaty tribe or you're a federally recognized tribe. It's really important for everyone to understand what that really means, the depth of that definition. Because then we turn to the United States Constitution, and I think everybody read the United States Constitution. And in Article 6, it states in there that treaties are the supreme law of the land. And you talk to any treaty tribe, and they really believe in the United States Constitution, mainly to that one clause, Article 6, treaties are the supreme law of the land. But you take that and you take a little bit further, and these are just 2 instances. The second instance is in Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 3, where it grants Congress the powers to regulate commerce with Indian tribes. It's really important to understand the depth of what that means. That establishes that whole government-to-government relationship. We were governments, the governments that the tribes had within their communities and the United States government, government-to-government relationship. So that's important for folks to understand that who get into the nuts and bolts of rules and regulations and how we're defined in those rules and regulations, and why we get so angry when things like this very statute that established this program, ACH, how we were not included in the development of that statute. And so we have to come back and work with you to make you understand that there's some things here that are really important to us and that we're going to fight for. But really, today we want to look deeper than that. We want to look deeper than this establishment of this government-to-government relationship, and look deeper than what has been defined by Congress as their ultimate responsibility, which is treaties are the supreme law of the land, that they have a trust responsibility, that they must uphold that trust responsibility clear across the United States government. It's just not the BIA, Department of Interior. Every agency within the federal government has a trust responsibility. And if you ever followed the things that happened up in Bellingham when Lummi stopped the coal port from being built, it was under that authority. And that's happening with water rights, that's happening with salmon, most importantly, to all of the Coast Salish people. It's under the power of that clause within the United States Constitution. But like I said, we're going to go deeper than that, in that I think before before 1855, there was a government there, and that government wasn't called a government. And the way we conducted our business and the way that we created peace amongst the people, and again, Oren Lyon says, it's real easy to fight. It's really hard to make peace. But that's what tribal communities were about before contact, is to maintain peace. And we did that with what we recognize today is with our way of life. It's called Chilangan. And our way of life defined us as not a people that was greater than anybody else, but in relationship with all living things. And the relationship with the salmon and with the water and with the trees, they were thought of as human beings themselves. As a matter of fact, we come from that. We come from the water, and we come from the salmon, and we come from the trees. It's a very deep relationship that can only be understood if you can come spend time with us to see how that plays out today. Because that way of life is still very much in place today. And the rules, the snup that goes along with that way of life are still practiced today. My sister and I and my nephew, we went to a gathering this winter, and it was at our community building, Wachlium. And the building is a replica of our old smokehouse, and you can fit a few thousand people in there with all the seats filled on both sides of the floor. I just have to point out that typically when we talk about the floor and we talk about having the floor, normally the speaker's on the ground looking up to the people. It's highly symbolic when you think about that, because the person on the floor is looking up to the people that he honors or she honors. It's very important to note that as we move forward. But in that gathering, there were 16 families there, 16 smokehouses, 16 peoples from the different tribes in our Coast Salish territory. And it started at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it went well past midnight, perhaps 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And the people that had the floor were respected and had the floor without distraction. And the ceremony went on that morning, that afternoon, that evening, clear into the night. And there were speakers on the floor. And if you looked really close, you noticed that the speakers were talking to grandmothers and talking to heads of families, following the rules and the protocols and the snup for what is to be done and what is to be shared, and those things that were handed down from generation to generation. Clear back to pre-treaty, those names pre-existed, those songs pre-existed, those ceremonies all come from someplace, and we carry that today. So you go through that whole process and you think about it, and you think about, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? There's nothing in writing here. There's nothing, there's not a cell phone in there that's recording what's being said. Because when you go into a room like that, you're going into a room that you're not thinking with your head, you're thinking with your heart. And your goal isn't to go there and collect a cool-looking T-shirt and all this stuff they give away for free. Your goal is to go there and give of yourself and give something away. And so that's important for all of us to understand, that form of government is still in place. We practice these things that were Chetalak and his father, Satsumton, and the fathers before them and the grandmothers before that practiced. And we're not going to find it in our manuals, but you're going to find it when you come in and spend time with us. and you will be respected and you'll be treated in that manner. So I'm sure some of you have had some problems in trying to work with tribes and tribal people, and it's because of that. It's because of that, perhaps you forgot to let an elder go first. Or perhaps you sat down and they offered you food and you didn't eat. Or perhaps you came late and left early. These are all part of the rules, the SNUP as we talk about it. And there's a whole lot more. It's very structured. We live a very structured life. And we understand our place within that life because that's what our parents and our grandparents left us. You know, there are some dumb people like me that didn't get it till later in life, but I'm starting to get it, you know. And I feel really honored that I had parents and grandparents that were able to share that with me. Somebody was mentioning that there is this, like tribes are emerging. I think my sister was talking about it last night, how these things are coming to life because of that structure, was able to live through the boarding school experience, live through alcohol. It was able to just to survive. And now we're thriving. And we're thriving because now, instead of our kids being taken away from us for no reason other than hateful reasons, our kids are being conceived, and our kids are in the womb, and our kids are hearing the language, and our kids are hearing the songs and the cadence of the old people while they're still in the womb. And those brain cells and those feelings are being developed with what we've always wanted for our people, which is this way of life. So out of all of this, then, I guess what I'd like to conclude with is that something that's just ingrained in our culture, and it's something that my mother used to try to get me to do when I was a young feller, and my father later when I got on the council. There's just really two things that we need to see as being really important when we have this time together, and that's that we go away with the idea that we accomplished something in regards to how respectful we were. And I'm thankful for each and every one of you for listening to me and feeling the respect that you're giving me while I say these few words. Respect is important to our people. And then alongside respect is just be so grateful. Be so grateful for what you have, and you really don't need much more. You need much more to give away. And being grateful is so important in this life that we live together. So with that, I'd like to introduce my my sister, Penny Carol Hilaire, who's going to lead us into this next discussion. I think we're going to show a video first, and then Penny Carol will take this even further. So, Aishka, Siam, Nastelicha. Thank you.
Okay, you guys are gonna have to put me on a clock, because I can go on and on.
Show the video.
Okay. Just becomes natural for me. And so when I went and I was working for Indian Child Welfare for 30 years, we developed law that developed a grandparent committee. We developed law that said grandparents have inherited rights to teach their children to be Lummi. They can't learn to be Lummi in Lynnwood or up in Linden. They have to be in their own homeland to know who they are and where they come from. So I'm visualizing my aunties sitting right here. First thing I got up this morning, my auntie got up, "How's it going, baby?" And I go, "I don't know. I don't know who we're talking to. I don't know what we're doing here, you know." And she says, "Oh, you do fine, you know." That's all I needed, to the reassurance. The trust responsibility to pave the way for the future, to plant seeds for our children, to hope that one day they could have orthodontists, they can have a swimming pool. People call it luxury, but I call it their treaty rights, that they deserve quality, flexible, and accessible health care. Our children, because you can just picture the treaty signers, how intelligent they were, how they were so giving. They were giving of their land. They were giving to be able to separate their families on behalf of us. Seeds were planted for us so that we can stand here and to remind people that there was a lot of sacrifice when that treaty was signed. I told you I can talk on and on and on. But I wanted to plant seeds with you. The shawl ceremony took protocol, family protocol. I knew I needed speakers. I knew I needed shawl makers. I knew I needed to feed the people. I knew there was tribal law that was set out for me, protocol that I needed to follow because my auntie was over there watching me. And it wasn't through a PowerPoint. It wasn't through this. I would have to go to the longhouse, to the smokehouse, sit there for hours and watch this repetitive, over and over. We're not second-class people, we're first-class people. Do it right. And so I always think about my aunts when I can feel them in the room right now. And I remember, how come, my mom was off lobbying for a new clinic? How come my mom cared about the education? Because that was her calling. And I remember, as we were growing up as teenagers, we became very rebellious because she was always gone. She was away from our home because she was sacrificing and making the United States government uphold their trust responsibility, and that was health care and education. And she said, "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for my grandchildren." She didn't have any grandchildren yet. So that's how we have to conduct ourselves. What are you leaving your grandchildren and great-grandchildren? What kind of health care system are you leaving? I always wanted a swimming pool. Why? Because during spring break or any kind of breaks, all the families are gathering. We're water people. And for some reason, people don't go to the salt water for whatever reason, maybe of all the toxics. But you go to the local swimming pool, all natives, 30-some kids in a small swimming pool, 30 grandmas sitting around the swimming pool, strengthening families, having orthodontics for our children so they have proper ears to hear the proper speech, the self-esteem, so that they can stand in front of a classroom and tell their report. Because we come with small jaws. This is everything that my mother taught me, 40 years ago, maybe 50. I'm 62 years old, and I'm like, wow, how does she know about all the dang jaw stuff, That's how insightful. So I just wanted to plant some seeds. There's protocol when there's ceremony like that. We're trained at a very young age. And each and one of you guys were born with a gift. And that's what I was taught. That's your gift. Because I can see the swimming pool. I may not live long enough to see it, but I always will fight for it. Every time we go to a general council meeting or meet with economic development, I raise Cain about the swimming pool. Why? Because I see all our babies are safe. We have an epidemic of opiates that causes sex trafficking, prostitution, hepatitis C. There's all these other health issues that opiate has caused. Well, what a safer place to have a swimming pool so that we can strengthen our families. And when we were dealing with opiates, we lost one of our nephews to opiates. And I told my family, my brothers, my sisters, my cousins, it starts at home. It has to start at home. We can't expect the government to save us. We have to have the right conversations within our own homes. And I see miracles every day. Kids that I've worked with when I was the youth rec director. And we developed programs so that kids had things to do on Friday, Saturday. We had the gym open on Sundays. And I seen some of those kids make those same choices of going down that road of when the opiates arrived onto our reservation. Killed a few of our people. But now I see the miracles. Why? Because we had accessible, we had flexible, and quality care for our opiate users. And that's our Suboxone Clinic. That's our Journey to Wellness Center. And it wasn't the government, it was the people saying, we want this, we want to be clean, we want to be well. Because we used to meet every morning, 7 in the morning, my brother was the chairman. And so we disciplined ourselves. Before everybody clocked into work, we met 7 in the morning. And we did our wish list, and that was the Suboxone Clinic. It was the Journey to Wellness Center so people can have NA, AA, Al-Anon. And then we went on to develop a home for our children, which is the Youth Academy. And so those were just seeds that were planted. And so we have to look as ourselves, what protocol are we following? Are we following the institutional model, people telling us, like what I always tell people back at home, why do we rely on the federal government and the state so that we tell them how sick we are and how needy we are? Why don't we look within and start developing the infrastructure so we can only rely on our own hard dollars to help our people? And we have. We have a veterans program. We have a youth rec program, which is now Youth Wellness Center. And so as I moved on to victims of crime, I utilized the tools that were taught to me by my ancestors. And then I utilized my institutional thinking to, okay, this is what we need to do. This is how we're going to make it happen. It's going to be uncomfortable to talk about sexual assault. It's going to be hard to talk about children being molested. It's going to be hard to know that elders are having financial exploitation. Why? Having the right conversation so that the kids have a better future. Because we can have a future without domestic violence and sexual assault. More and more calls are coming in. Are we ready? Are we ready to address the need when people picking up the phone and saying, I've been assaulted? We have a 24-hour hotline. My son's one of them, and he'll go to ER. We have a suicide attempt. We send out our advocates. The Lummi Nation is responding to the need. And so that's what we have to do together. We still have a lot of need, like daycare for our babies. Once again, why don't we utilize Medicaid as a vehicle to help us so that mothers feel safe leaving their babies while they go earn a living? The fishing has depleted over the years, and it's brought a lot of mental health issues, such as, depression, such as domestic violence, because the the fishermen weren't able to provide for their families anymore. And so this is just protocol that we had utilized with the shawl ceremony. And then with our community, I have go-to people. I'll call up Barb. Barb, can you come help? Candy, come and speak for me. Hey, can you spread the table? There's go-to people in our communities that are perhaps maybe underutilized. People that will stand with you so that the message is stronger. And I try to do the same thing for our partners that come to our events, to the shawl ceremony. I make sure I go support them. We had a missing and murdered Indigenous woman walk, and two of the daughters lost their mothers to a horrific murder. And I was just so blown away, and one of the daughters says, now I don't feel all alone anymore, because she didn't want to believe that her mother was murdered. We're having the right conversation. The healing is beginning. The generation, the millennium generation, is so awesome because they're bringing forth these topics about sexual assault, two-spirited, murdered women. They're the ones, and we're just getting them organized and supporting them. And so what can we do differently for our kids, our great-grandkids, and what does that healthcare system look like? Then I'm going to bring you down this here journey that I went when I first was introduced to Title 19, which is Medicaid for tribes. I was in an education meeting. I was the youth rec director. And I believe it was Tulalip that came up and did a presentation. And one of my elders goes, "What are you doing? What are you doing? How come you're not doing nothing about it?" So therefore, I began to research. I began to go ask someone in the community, "Do you know anything about this? Do you know anything about this?" And so that's how I learned that, okay, it was time to go on and get my master's degree, because we were faced with a lot of fatalities of our young kids leaving us. And one of the little girls said, "You promise never to leave me? My mommy died." I had no tools. I had not ever been asked, will you never leave me? So anyways, I went on and got my master's, and I began to work at our clinic. But there was a lot of no-shows. I had my calendar, got a 9 o'clock appointment, 10 o'clock appointment. That institutional approach did not work for our children. So therefore, I asked, can I go into the classrooms? Can I go to the tribal school? And so with the clinic and the schools, they made that happen. So I began to work with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. And it was beautiful. So I put all these subjects adversities that we were dealing with in our community. This was probably 10, 15 years ago. But anyways, I put them up there. I go, "Where's your red flag? Do you guys want to talk about alcohol? Do you guys want to talk about people stealing from your home? Do you guys want to talk about violence?" And so the kids walk up and they'd say, "I want to talk about this. My daddy sold my Xbox for drugs." Well, my dad did too. So we would begin to give our children tools, coping skills, problem solving, and so that they didn't have to carry that hurt around. We call it strength-based mental health. And so that's how the YES program, the youth wellness, we have outreach into our tribal schools. We have mental health that goes out and reach. We have mental health counselors that go right into the homes. That approach works because the kids feel safe, the families feel safe. a lot of times, you know, I was wondering how come they took prayer out of schools, you know, and back in the 2004, and we were beginning this Medicaid journey and everything, and we had a youth council, and I said, let's pray. They were always look forward to pray. Even today in our home, I'm one of 14. And then several nieces and nephews, and Brother Darrell's grandchildren, my grandchildren, Julia's grandchildren. Let's pray. Let's pray. And so the room is full to really encourage children and youth and to be open to not be afraid what was rightfully ours. We're praying people. Indigenous people are praying people, and we do it through song and dance. And one last thing I visualize, I go on canoe journey every year. Why? Because it's all praying people. So I was sitting at camp with the Black Hawk singers and the iPod singers, and this little girl goes, hey, I'm gonna pray for my mom and dad today. I go, right on, babe. So when they're dancing on that floor, it's just not performance, it's a prayer. They're praying for their families. When they're making their shawls, it's a prayer. Every stitch, I pray for my mom. I pray for my dad. I pray for my brother. I pray for my friend. I pray. And I've seen that happen because they have really good teachers. These kids are continuously coming back, practicing what was inherently left for them. And we no longer need permission. And that is a beautiful sight to see for our kids, because back in the days, we didn't have the opportunities. There was a seed planted in my son to it's okay to sing. It wasn't me, it had to have been a male. Someone planted a seed, and that's what we have to do, is plant seeds in the next generation, the doctors, the nurses, the social workers, the mental health providers. Are you answering your calling, or is it just a job? Every day I go, okay, God help me. What am I supposed to do? I never thought I'd be working with women. I worked for kids all my life. I was a bus driver. Drove a big old bus, and now how do I fit this into being a caregiver of the children? You seen that little baby with the cedar shawl? That's my goal, so he never has to see his mom beat up. He never has to live in a community where people are silent because someone was raped. Our children are being more protected from child molestation, that elders are honored and not taken advantage of. Is my time up yet? Oh, how much more time? How much more time? Yeah. Oh. Is there any questions? Any questions or comments? So Medicaid can mold the future for a better tomorrow for all children of all colors. We just need to open that door and begin to pave the way for them. I know a lot of our kids need orthodontics because they can't talk. They won't talk. They'll cover up their mouth like that. They won't speak up in class. They'll isolate. And there's so much bullying going on nowadays, too. You know, you can't have any flaws this day and age. The kids are bullied. So many are bullied. I even know kids that have committed suicide because of bullying. How much more are we going to tolerate? Give the kids the tools and the opportunities to be successful. Every child deserves to have speech and hearing and to have the self-esteem to stand up in front of his classmates and tell their story. And then you guys can all chip in from a swimming pool. It is such a beautiful sight to watch our families. That's just one way to fight the opiate crisis, providing opportunities to strengthen our families, keep our families together so we can have those little conversations. Don't let anybody touch you. Stay away from there. It's not a safe place over there. That's where the families can have the right conversation. So thank each and every one of you. I hope you're answering your calling. We're just here to just plant seeds, and there's protocol and everything that we do in Lummi, Tulalip, Swinomish. It's called sovereignty. We have sovereignty in our families, in our community, in our ceremonies, in everything that we do, we have sovereignty. I have to follow that protocol. And if I don't, my aunties will tell me. So thank each and every one of you. Haishka.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I have to wear my glasses so I can see you. So my name is Julia Ortiz, and one thing I want to say first before I get started is I'm just thrilled that we're all in this room together and we're talking about equity, and that the ACH prioritized a conversation, beginning conversations with tribal people. As you must know, there's 29 tribes in Washington State, and I think that's probably one of the, we have one of the largest tribal presences in this state, on the nation. So I just want to say thank you, Haishka. I really appreciate that. I'm the left brainer. I am a clinician by training. I have an MSW, and I'm licensed as a mental health counselor. I did work at CMAR for my first 15 years and did direct service and learned, just like all UA had to learn, how to work with the state of Washington, how to maximize billing, how to keep access open, all of those things. And working at CMAR was great for me because it was bilingual, bicultural. That's where I come from. I'm Aztec on my mom's side and Mayan on my dad's side. But the other thing about me is my personal life. I was married into the Lummi Nation and grew up there as an adult woman. And their mother was my mentor, Violet Hilaire, and also their father, the late Henry Penny Hilaire. So I've kind of lived in three worlds, and maybe some of you can relate to that. One question I wanted to ask, though, to the audience here is how many of you have worked with tribal communities and or are currently working with tribal communities? Can you raise your hand for me? Oh, good. That's great. Okay. So I don't know okay, so they have the native transformations. I asked for these slides to be behind me because this is some of the work that we're doing now in Indian country at Lummi Nation, Swinomish, and Tulalip. And one thing I want to pass down to you all too today is that let's remember tribes are very sophisticated. They are. Yes, they live in rural areas. Yes, we've had difficulties with computers and technology and things like that, but we are in the canoe and we are pulling forward. We are pulling together. And what we're doing in transformations, if you could show the next slide, is we're actually getting information from the people. So interviewing Coast Salish adults mostly Coast Salish adults about what things are important to them, what values they hold in their heart. Protocols, like they've just mentioned, are oral things. They're not written down, and they're not allowed to be written down. So trying to figure out how you're going to develop a service delivery health system that meets their needs can be sort of tricky. And that's why building relationships is so important. So they're giving you great ideas about how you do it. But I will tell you, as a person that's an outsider living in the Lummi community for now almost 41 years, you have to know your place, and it takes time. People have to be able to vouch for you that you're really sincerely into the work and you're really there as an ally, and you're not like a colonized ally. You're a decolonized ally, and I'll let you guys think about that. Maybe we can talk about that later in the breakout session. Thank you. So in our work, can you guys all hear me okay? Okay, great. So in our work, asking people, what is it that they value? What do they hold dear? So these are some of the things that we were able to ask them. That's the kind of approach we use. We're going to bring booklets next time. I didn't have enough to bring, but I just wanted to show the work. So this is indigenous research that's happening. We're doing it with the University of Alaska and Fairbanks. We're doing interviews at Lummi, Swinomish, and Upper Skagit. We're trying to get our own emerging practices of evidence-based work that really is culturally sensitive and competent. So I'm telling you guys this because it's very exciting news for all of us. We're going to be publishing probably soon, and this kind of work can be really practical in your settings because it's something that isn't sacred. It isn't something that we're adding to or taking away, like my nephew said. It's something that is just kind of like education. It's education about the people. So it's leading into not only the sources of strength that they identify, which is family, and I forget, family. It's mostly family. It's there. You can read it. Thank you. But also, what are the protective factors, right? So us as clinicians, we're always like, oh man, these risk factors, they were talking about it, domestic violence, our young people and adults that are in parenting ages, they're addicted to opioids, they're physically present, but emotionally and spiritually, they're gone. We want to help get what comes from the people that will work. So knowing what protective factors are that are meaningful to the community you're trying to serve, knowing what they hold dearly, these are really key pieces. So back to this Medicaid story that Penny Carroll was talking about. So in 2004, we started to learn more about Medicaid and how it could really benefit tribes. And what we were able to do was come together, and so she was the right brain, and I was the left brain. So I came with all the state stuff, preferred health provider, contracts through, in my day it was, what were they called? RSN, and then then there was the APN, and then there was Compass Health and all this other stuff. So I came with kind of that. It was a box, in a sense. It was a box, because we all knew we had to do that in order to make sure our work was good, integrity was high, and that we were documenting the work so that we could bill and then get the reimbursement. They talked about the tribal encounter rate. So that, I don't know the whole history on that. I advise all of you to write down this. The American Indian Health Commission is a great resource. It's right here in Washington State. They have a large overview of the history of tribes in Washington State, the relationship that unfolded, et cetera, and then Medicaid and all of that. And they're working on a Medicaid transformation, I believe. But getting back to this, what we did, and what we've always tried to do, I think, is we've tried to learn what's good from Western thinking, like going to school, getting your master's, all this other stuff, technology, research, that kind of thing. But what we wanted to do was still be true to who we were. And so what I did as a person coming in with technical knowledge, I just sat and listened. So if you're new to a tribal community, I'll tell you that's a big plus, is you keep your ears open, your eyes open, and your mouth closed. That's how they know that you're really there to listen and learn and not talk over them or talk at them. okay? So that's what I did initially. I was doing a tribal best practice approach, didn't even know it. And I didn't know it because I was raised with them, and so it was kind of like second nature to me. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be second nature to all of you. So in listening, that's how we were able to formulate our clinical format that had all the pieces that are necessary: assessment, treatment plan, progress note, treatment plan review, all that stuff. We were able to develop a clinical format and then recruit and get providers on board. Now, at that time, this last 15 years, those have been non-tribal people, only because of the education and the credential piece. Now I'm happy to say that, Lummi, and I'm very, very fond of Lummi, just FYI, Lummi has had a tribal college, one of the accredited tribal colleges in the United States, and they're getting people AAs, our tribal people AAs, they're getting BAs there, you can get a BA there, they're working on getting a master's program there. Western Washington is in Bellingham, the UW, that's where I went. So we're growing from within, and that's really exciting because that means that we're gonna have tribal people that are gonna be doing the work that we have non-tribal doing now. And that doesn't mean that those allies can't continue, but this is a big plus when you have your own people that know the community and can really understand all the nuances straight up. So it's just like an accelerated relationship. So I come with, I think, really good news because I see the health future in Indian country just getting bigger and better. And it's going to take all of us, though, like Liz was mentioning in her opening, it's going to take all of us because we're all connected. We're all connected. And me, in my 61 years, I'm finally getting it. I was really bad, not that I want to do confession up here, but I was, I was really like, I isolated myself from non-people of color, like my whole life. And I'm understanding now, standing here as a grandma, that that's just not good enough. That's just not good enough. We all have to work together. We all have commonalities, humanistic values. We do. And so some of these things that you see up here, I bet are resonating with you right now. You're going, wow, yeah, I get that. It's family. It's connection. It's openness. It's recognizing talents within your own family of young people growing and saying, we want you to do this, we want you to do that. Things are clear when it's like that. It's just a beautiful thing. So I don't know how much time we have. Oh, good. So really, essentially, that's what I came, I think, this morning to share with you. I hope we can continue to be allies. I think that we have some good information to share with you. Sharing is caring. And I look forward to working with you all more in the future. And I'll see you at the breakout session. Thank you. Haishka.
I'm not stalling, I'm just trying to do it without my glasses. Yeah, well, there they are. Yeah, well. There's one piece of information that I failed to mention that I need to add to this conversation, and it's really important for us to note when we talk about working together and under what laws and what statutes. I think it was about 1986, 1988, Our chairman, the late Larry Kinley, he went back to Washington, D.C., and they did quite regularly back then. They had hearings. He testified before the House Resource Committee, which is the committee that allocated the funding to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is under the Department of Interior, which reported to the president. And he was testifying before the chairman of the House Resource Committee, Representative Sid Yates from the state of Illinois. I think he was from Chicago. And he was testifying to Chairman Yates, all of those things that weren't working for Lummi in its dependency upon the BIA to deliver its trust responsibility. There were no policemen on our reservation. There was no clinic. The funding for our education system was pretty much non-existent. If you applied for a grant from the BIA to go to college, you would apply 1 year and you would get it the following year. You would apply to the BIA to get assistance do an appraisal on some land, and by the time they got around to do the appraisal and get all the paperwork done, the appraisal expired, so you have to go do another one. All these things that were wrong with the BIA upholding its trust responsibility. So Sidney Yates stopped Chairman Kinley and says, well, do you think you can do it better? And he said, yes. So Chairman Yates directed our chairman, the late Larry Kinley, as well as the other tribes that were there, well, give me something that I can look at. And I remember the late Joe Dela Cruz from the Quinault Nation, and the chairman, Ron Allen from Jamestown's Clown. Those three leaders from the state of Washington, the tribes that are located in the state of Washington, as well as three other tribes, went out and developed some language. And they developed a language that became the self-determination movement, self-governance. There was a law called 93-638, which was the Indian Self-Determination Act, signed by President Nixon. And they amended that law to take it even further, where now Representative Yates and our senator here, Senator Dan Evans, joined in on that movement, the self-governance movement. So what they did is they set up a demonstration project where those 6 tribes, the 3 from the state of Washington, remember Hoopa was one from California, I remember Sac and Fox from Oklahoma was the other one. There was one other tribe, and it fails me now, but I'll remember when I'm on the car driving home. But they demonstrated that, we could do it better ourselves. And they proved self-governance. And one of the key elements of that was pre-self-governance, when funding was allocated to the tribes for those services that were granted under treaty, they went through the federal system, which means Congress allocated the money and the president signed the bill, and the money went over to the Bureau of Indian Affairs or Department of Health and Human Services to provide services to all of the tribes in this country. They, the percentage was that for every $10 that were allocated, actually only $1 arrived on the reservation. Even though that $10 represented the full responsibility, well, it took $9 to administer that $1. Self-governance, overnight, it went from $1 to $7. So overnight, we had the resources to begin solving some of these problems and organize ourselves, much like my sister and Julie were talking about. Pre-self-governance, that would never happen. And we went from like a grant mentality to a self-governing mentality. We had to learn really quick that we didn't have to act like the BIA to do this work. We could integrate spirituality, we could integrate family, we could put people in the community rather than behind a desk to solve some of these problems. So that's really important to note that as we move forward today and we try to figure out how to work together, that the spirit of self-governance is very much alive in our tribal communities, and that colonial thinking and that dependency that was created is things that were just unraveling, you know, and there's a lot of work to be done there yet, but we're working, and it's coming together. That makes sense? So I'm here to invite you, because having this conversation with you today is okay. But we know that the best way to influence perceptions and create these bridges that we need to build to work together, that we need to walk together. We need to learn how to walk together. We need to be able to sit on the beach and look at what's going on around us, what the kids are doing, where the grandparents sit, what the head of the house is doing in terms of taking care of everybody. We need to experience that. So we're inviting you to a number of events to have this experiential learning. And the first one is at Tulalip Days, June 8th and 9th. And be sure to email me or somebody on our team that if you want to go, then we'll meet you there. And we'll share with you as much as we can and introduce you to the Tulalip people and the things that they're doing and the opportunities that we can create together with the Tulalip people. And then on June 21st through the 23rd is Lummi Squamish Water Festival. Children of the Setting Sun, we'll have a camp set up. We will have food. We'll have our elders there. We'll have a number of people coming and going from all of the different Coast Salish communities, both U.S. and Canada there. And you'll experience the language. You'll get to witness war canoe racing. You get to hear the soundtrack of our people with the Sahel games that are going on. And you'll learn about our families. So if you can make it, be sure to contact us via email or phone call. You know, I don't want to disrespect him, but I hope not all of you come, you know, that'd be pretty crazy, you know. My sister and I have an older brother, his name is Daryl Hilaire. And if I asked my brother Terry to come up here and speak, he'd probably talk for 1 minute. But if I asked my brother Terry to cook salmon for you, he would do it. And it speaks probably a million words. He's kind of like a broker. He knows every fishery between the Columbia River and the Fraser River. And he knows all the fishermen. He knows when the fish are running. He knows what the price is, so you can't pull something over over him. But he, as Penny Carroll was bringing out the people she calls, well, she calls my brother too. And it's a rule in our culture that when you're asked to do something, you don't turn it down. And he probably cooks like 200 times a year. Does anybody know what the Willows Inn is up on Lummi Island? Does anybody know who the Willows Inn? You ever hear that place? And that chef is kind of like the top chef in the country and the world. Or his name is Blaine Wetzel. And do you know who he adores? It's my brother. Yeah, he is just amazed by my brother Terry. He came back over to Squamish last year, and Terry gave him some fish, and he gave Terry a big hug, and he was just amazed. He wanted Terry to come cook salmon over at the Willows Inn, and my brother doesn't know that they charge like $140 a plate to eat there, but Terry doesn't charge anything, so. But that's Squamish, and then paddle to Lummi is, and they're going to land at Lummi July 24th to the 28th. And again, we'll be set up. Again, if you'd like to come and join us and contact us, the times that you'll be there. And if you want to know more about that, I need to start asking questions now because Lummi is the final destination. And prior to getting to Lummi, they'll be at either Samish or they'll be up north, maybe Birch Bay or the next nearest tribe. And what they do is they start from those tribes that are furthest away start first. Like the tribal family in Bella Bella is going to kick it off, and they're going to take off on their canoe, and they're going to make their way down to Lummi. And each village that they come upon, they'll stop there. Then that village will add their canoe, and then the flotilla will get bigger and bigger. Canoes from the Columbia River will come up the coast, and they'll stop at every tribe along the way, and they'll stop at Quileute and Quinault, Makah, Squamish. They're just all joined together. And finally, when they get to Lummi, they'll all paddle into our landing area together. There will be a big welcome, a big dinner, and then there will be a big giveaway. The spirit of the giveaway is something that I think we need to experience on the biggest scale, so that every day we make that endeavor to offer those things that we carry to others that need our help. So that's the teaching, the spirit of the giveaway, the spirit of the potlatch. And then August 10th and 11th, Swinomish Days. We'll be there to introduce you to the people from the Swinomish tribe and their days, much like Tulalip and the Lummi Squamish, is the same protocols and the same things that we bring out are being brought out there. So those are the invitations, and if you really want to get to know us, just be in touch, because we're doing work all the time. We'll be in Seattle with, I don't even remember the name of that think tank now. Remember, Natasha? I'll bring it up in private conversation. But also, this is a good example, and we very rarely say no at Children of the Setting Sun. This woman came through our door a couple of weeks ago and asked us to welcome some Buddhist monks that are coming to Bellingham. And they're going to build a mandala, sand sculpture. So we said, sure. So we're going to bring Buddhist monks to our smokehouse, Crab Bay Smokehouse, and we'll have ceremony where the Lummi songs and dances will be shared with the Buddhist monks who will share their songs. And it's all about Mother Earth and what we can do to bring that energy together, because we have a lot of work there that needs to be done, and we want to join in that work. So these are the invitations, and try to reach out to us, and so we can start this friendship and start this work. At this time, I'd like to call forward my nephew, TJ, so he's going to offer some final words, and then I think we're going to go into a break, and then see you in the breakout session. Oh, excuse me. It's funny how your brain works when you get older. But we have a video to share. It's the Paddle to Lummi video. Before we go there, though, I'd like to have all of our Children of the Setting Sun team step onto the stage just for a couple seconds so you can see all of us. So we all work together. We try to create family, and everybody's got their gifts. So we have folks with technical gifts and gifts for writing and communication, and I want all of us to be recognized because they do a lot of work behind the scenes, and we can give them a hand too, thank you. So I guess we're going to show the video, and then TJ will do the wrap, okay? Thank you.
on the agenda. I think that probably the way that I would introduce John Powell is really first and foremost, he has been incredibly generous with his time for us. Our team met him at the Equity Summit in Chicago now 13-ish months ago. And, I came up, he was finished speaking, I walked up on one of these, things, whatever they're called, and I think I said, what would it take to get you to the farthest northwest corner of the state of Washington? And we probably had 3 or 4 opportunities to meet with him as he was doing other things in the Seattle area before we ever actually said, really, we could pay you for some of this work. But it has really enriched our team, and these things that he's going to talk about, they are embedded in our project plan and in our implementation plan. So just really excited that you get an opportunity to both hear from him, but a lot of the time that we're going to have today is going to actually be you being able to ask questions and kind of pose some things. So please join me in welcoming John Powell.
Good morning. Good morning. It is great to be here on a sunny day in Seattle, Washington area. I'm trying to find a place to put my things. Let's set it right here. So some of you I've seen before, some of you I'm seeing for the first time, but I hope not for the last time. And a few of you actually came to the Othering and Belonging Conference that we just had a month or so ago in Oakland. And in fact, I think at least one person is wearing the Othering and Belonging t-shirts. So they're available for those of you who haven't been there. And I will say, just as a footnote, the conference plenaries are online. So you can actually go and look at least not all the breakouts, but you can see some of the stuff online. It was an amazing conference. And obviously, I'm going to be building on some of the stuff today, but through a health perspective. But let me just say, the conference opened up with a woman, I think her name is pronounced Hassan. She is blind and deaf. Her family is from Eritrea. They've fled violence in Eritrea. And she is the first blind, deaf person to graduate from Harvard Law School. And at the conference, she talked about disability as innovation. And she had a slide, a video, which you actually can go online to see, and it had her surfing. Think about this, she's blind and deaf, and she's on the ocean surfing. And her dog, her service dog, is at the shore. It's like, you go ahead, I'll wait here. And then, of course, the conference ended. Some of you may know is the work of Reverend Barber, and he has something called Moral Monday. Anyways, amazing conference, and thank those of you who attended, and you'll get a sense of some of the work around belonging and othering. And I know those terms may be wonky for those of you who have never heard the terms, but you'll hopefully see by the end of my talk today that they're quite important. So I'm talking about building a bigger and healthier we in a time where the country, and indeed the world, is actually experiencing a lot of othering. And in the conversation this morning from the various tribes, you heard about the importance of essentially bridging and connecting, and they grounded it, and I appreciate you doing that. They grounded it in their tribal traditions. And I want to build on that. I want to suggest that that's a deep tradition for us to actually learn from, all of us who are not necessarily directly affiliated with the tribe. But it's also something that the world really needs now. We're really at an incredibly important time, and it has implications for everything, for health, for not just the health of us individually in our communities, but for the health of our planet. So that's what I'm going to be sharing with you. this morning. And also, let me just say, this story, I just want to add a little bit to it. When she came up and she said, well, how do we get you to come up to Washington? And I said, you asked. And she did, and I did. And it's really been a delight working with Liz. My friend, long-term friend, Paul Hudson, who's head of the C Collaborative, he says that Liz is one of his favorite people. And there's some stickiness between Liz and Paul, and I'm in that too. And so you may see more of us, and hopefully you won't get tired of seeing me. It's like, oh, here comes John again. Doesn't Liz know anybody else? So this word sabawanu, it's a Zulu word, and it means I see you. A deeper translation is the God in me sees the God in you. And if we can see each other, not view each other, not look at each other, but really see each other. And they go further in the sense that when I see you, I see your ancestors. I see your family. I even see part of your future. And the response is, when it's a greeting, I see you, the response is, I am here. I am fully present. So if we can learn to really see each other, we've done a lot of the work. So I'm going to start off talking about the habits of the mind. And the habits of the mind, which some of you may know of as things like implicit bias or the mind science, is basically how the unconscious works. And I'm not going to be able to go into great detail, but I do want to give you some introduction to it for those of you who are not already introduced to it. One of the sort of unusual things, or maybe surprising things, is the unconscious is profoundly social, which is almost contradictory. People think of your deep unconscious thoughts are deeply personal. Excuse me. And it's actually not right. If there's personal thoughts at all, they happen at the conscious level. The unconscious is profoundly social, and they're habits. The unconscious is a habituated process, and it happens not just in, not just in terms of people, but also in terms of other animals as well. So you probably have heard of Pavlov's dog. And so you ring the bell, and you feed the dog. You ring the bell, and you feed the dog. You ring the bell, and the dog starts salivating. Then what's happened is that the dog has drawn a neural connection between the bell and food. And of course, you know, in the world, there really is no obvious connection between bells and food. And even a smart dog is going to get tricked by that, because at the unconscious level, the dog is actually drawing a connection. And all of us are like that. And so they become habits at the unconscious level. And those habits are built up largely through repetition and frequency and proximity. So when something's happened close together, over and over again, the unconscious draws a connection, whether there's a connection or not in the actual world. And that connection turns out to be very powerful and also very useful, but also somewhat problematic, in the sense that we draw connections in the world that are not real. And sometimes those connections are helpful in terms of us negotiating life, and sometimes they're not. So an example. First of all, the unconscious is extremely fast and extremely big. And the conscious is very slow and tiny. So most of the work that's done in terms of navigating life actually happens at the unconscious level. Now, interesting, I already said the unconscious is actually reflecting stuff that's happening outside. It's reflecting those repetitions that's happening in the physical world. So it's not a private space. It's actually a reflection of the larger world and the repetition that happens in the larger world. But it happens very fast. And so we don't have time to think about it. And if we tried to think about it, we would not survive. Evolutionary, as we move through life, we're going through the savannah in Africa, where all of us hung out at one point, and we see a stick, and we say, is that stick a real stick, or is that stick a snake? For the person who pondered that a great deal, and it was actually a snake, that person doesn't have any offspring. What the unconscious does is says, snake. Now, it might be wrong, but it reacts. And so it is very fast, and it helps us make decisions without a deliberate process. And sometimes those decisions are not accurate, and we'll come back to that. And not being accurate is where bias comes in. So part of the thing is we all have bias. And unfortunately, we're biased to the word bias, right? So we don't like the word. I don't want to be biased. You know, maybe my wife or my husband are biased, but not me. We like to think we're really in control. And if nothing else, I hope I convince you today you're not in control. And I've given variations of this talk many times, and there was one point where someone raised their hand and they said, Professor Powell, you know, I know you teach at Berkeley and all that, but you're saying this stuff about my unconscious. You don't know me. You don't know my unconscious. And my response was, you're absolutely right. Maybe I was being a little bit too hubris. But my point is not that I know you. My point is that you don't know you either. So we're going to play a couple of little games just to get you warmed up. This first game is called the strobe test. And what it is that you see these colors here, although and you're not supposed to be seeing all of them. Let's see if they, okay. Unfortunately, my assistant didn't correct this. So I'll give this to Liz and she can share it with you at your own leisure. We can still go ahead though. So, what shape do you see? Okay. I'm going to keep going. Okay, this is what I was referring to you earlier. The human brain let me just do one thing. The human brain processes 11 million bits of information a second. 11 million at an unconscious level. During that same second that your unconscious is processing 11 million bits of information, your conscious is processing 40. So 11 million versus 40, which means, in effect, your unconscious is doing all the work, and your conscious is actually just going for the ride. And it's even worse than that. Every so often, you know how Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Blink, and he talked about in that book that sometimes something just pops in your mind. It's like I was just walking down the street and all of a sudden, boom, it just popped in my mind. Actually, that's not the way the mind really works. What happens is that your unconscious is working on something, and when it gets it curated right, it sends it upstairs to the conscious. And the conscious, being totally unaware that all this work is going on in the basement, says, boom, this thing just popped in my mind, right? No, it's been in the mind all the time. And the unconscious is actually processing it. And so that's how a lot of decisions that we make, a lot of these associations. And these associations are quite profound. So for example, as you can see, only about under 15% of men in the United States are over 6 feet. And only about 3% are over 6'2". Yes, I'm over 6'2", I may have to say it. But here's the thing. As you can see, 60% of the CEOs in the United States are over 6 feet. Over 30% over 6'2". If you have children, maybe it's too late if your children are already grown, but for every inch your male child is over 6 feet, they're slated to make an extra $150,000 in their life. up to about 6'6", and then it tapers off. So if you want to have really rich children, make sure they're tall. Now, why is this? Now, some people would say maybe tall people are smarter, maybe tall people are more handsome. Paul is shaking his head no. Paul is under 6 feet, by the way. Really what it is a bias that somehow in an evolutionary space, we've actually associated height with intelligence in men in particular. And there may have been a time when this was important. When you're running around trying to get away from snakes and lions, your physical attributes may have been more important. Those evolutionary things don't go away now that we're not dealing with snakes and tigers. And so we have this deep association that most people don't even think about. So when you're interviewing someone at a job, you don't say, okay, Ralph, great resume, now stand up and let me see how tall you are, right? And yet it has a huge impact in terms of distribution of resources in our society. Here's a video, and hopefully it'll play. I don't know if the sound is on.
So it's playing, but the
No sound.
presenter view.
The presenter shouldn't affect the sound. So I'll tell you what's happening here, and hopefully you'll get a chance to see it. What you're supposed to do here, if this works, is there's a team in white, and you're supposed to count the number of passes they make with the basketball. I'm having too much luck in terms of technology today. Okay, we're not getting any sound, so I'm just going to play it without the sound. All right, so again, you're to count the number of passes that the team in white is making. Let's see if this works now. No, that's a different one.
A woman was yelling and was robbed. Did you say stop? You're right. That last statement
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count?
How many?
The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla? This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris and is copyrighted.
Okay.
It is available for use in talks, training, and teaching on DVDs from VisCog Productions. Learn more at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
So let me see. How many of you got the number right? 15. All right. How many of you saw the gorilla? Okay.
black and a black, and 1 red card.
It's not the video that, oftentimes people can't get the number and the gorilla right. Either they get the number right and they don't see the gorilla, or they see the gorilla and they don't get the number. And part of it is again, put it back at presenter. No, we have it. No. Nice.
When I go to presenter, you go to start this one.
Okay, yay. All right. So I want you to watch the screen again, and hopefully we'll have better luck. Okay, that worked. All right, so watch the screen. And what did you see? Okay, 3. I'll show you one more time. Ready? Okay. Okay, so most of you can't make out what's up there, right? Now, did you make it out that time? Okay, show you one more time. What did you see that time? A face, okay. How many of you saw a face? All right. So the first one, you didn't see the face, but you did. The second one, you saw the face, but you did. The difference is, the first one, your unconscious saw the face, because remember, the unconscious is very fast and very big. The second one, your conscious and your unconscious saw the face. So what we've done with this is called priming. So what your unconscious takes in affects your behavior. So it's not just that something happens at the unconscious level and it's not important. It actually is important. Excuse me. And what we know, and this is work done by Professor Jennifer Eberhardt, is that, so the second one, you saw the face, first one you didn't. If you show people a picture at a subliminal level, which means you don't see it consciously, it affects what else they see. In this case, what was done is a picture of a degraded picture of a gun is shown to people after they see the face. And after they've seen the face, if they see the black face, their ability to identify the gun speeds up. So you have a very degraded picture, which you can't make out, but if you prime them with seeing a picture of a black face at a subliminal level, which means they don't consciously see the face, they then identify a gun much faster. And so why is this? The reason is because in our society, we associate black men with guns. Now, some of you who do research or just read the newspaper will realize that per capita, the group that is most likely to have guns in America is which group? White men, by far. But the unconscious is not a researcher. So it's not going to go do a site check. It's just going to watch television, listen to the news, turn on Fox News, and all you see is the black people killing people. It's like, you know, when 9/11 happened, there was a movie called 24. Did any of you ever see that? It was about Keith Sutherland. He was like trying to prevent terrorists. And every time you saw someone of Muslim or Arab descent, they were blowing stuff up. Now that's not accurate, but on television, that's what was being portrayed. And I actually took a team of people to Hollywood, and sat down and met with the screenwriters. And I said, we have a problem. We're sending a message that Muslims are terrorists, that all Muslims are terrorists. And they say, well, no. We're not racist. This is television. This is fiction. And I said, the unconscious does not distinguish between fiction and fact. All it's looking at is frequency and proximity. And what you're showing is every time there's someone of Arab descent, they're terrorists. And the reality is, most Americans will never see an Arab, will never know a Muslim. And in fact, if you don't know a Muslim, you're more likely to believe that most Muslims are terrorists. If you don't know a black man, you're more likely to believe that black men are engaged in gun violence. So your absence of knowing people make these biases even stronger. And again, when people, and think about this, and it happens more when you're under pressure. So police is going down the street late at night. Maybe it's a white policeman. Maybe he grew up in a white suburban neighborhood. Maybe there are very few black people that he knew. And he see a black person. He's primed now to see a gun. And I work with police all over the country. And they'll say, you know, I really thought the person had a gun. I'm sure. I saw the gun. I say, no, the unconscious saw the gun because you expected to see the gun. Now, it doesn't mean that the person is racist, because in terms of seeing a gun after you've seen a black face, it actually not only happens with white folks, it happens with black folks as well. Because they're seeing the same frequency of black people in violence on television that white people are. The difference is this. When I see a black person always killing people, and I look at my dad, it's like, it doesn't compute. I know my dad is a very kind, gentle, nonviolent person. And so I have something to disrupt that message. It doesn't destroy it, it disrupts it. The same in terms of like you walk into a classroom in college and you see a woman math teacher. Well, again, in our society, we have a stereotype that women are not good at math. Notwithstanding the fact, I mean, I don't know how many of you saw the movie Hidden Figures. Some women are pretty good at math. Doesn't matter, that's not the stereotype. So you walk into a classroom and literally the students will have like, ooh, I thought I was gonna have a real math teacher. Instead I got a woman. And you can't disrupt that with one person. You need to go over and over again because you're trying to actually disrupt something that's lodged in the unconscious. And this process of actually seeing someone as being different, seeing someone as being violent, seeing someone as being not capable, is similar to a process of othering. Somehow this person doesn't quite belong in the role they're in. So we recently had a presidential election. Anybody remember that? When the election started, regardless to what candidate you supported or you, I felt like, even despite the polls, Hillary would have a very difficult chance winning. You know why? Because about 24% of Americans believe that no woman, not Hillary, no woman is really capable of being president. So that means any woman at that time, and the numbers haven't gotten much better, starts off with a 24% handicap. Now that's at an unconscious level, not a conscious level. So if you ask people, oh yeah, anybody can be president. But the unconscious and conscious don't always follow the same line. This is something that's done by a scholar named, she's at Princeton, Susan Fisk. It's called Stereotype Content Model. And basically, it's two axes. And one of them is how warm you feel towards someone. The other one is how smart you think they are. And based on that, she created 4 boxes. So if you think someone is smart and you like them, is the gold standard. And she does national surveys across multiple countries to see who falls in these various boxes. Again, it won't surprise you that generally speaking, in the United States, white men are in the smart, we like them category. Asians, Asian Americans, others, are in the smart, but we don't like them category. Women are in the category we like them, but not all that smart. And then blacks and homeless people, we don't like them, and they're not very smart. Now, when you don't like someone and they're not very smart, something happens. And there's some indication that, at least in large part of the country, Native people fall into that, not very smart, we don't really like them. When you don't like someone, these are national samples. These are all at unconscious level. And you don't think they're very smart. Part of the brain that's designed to recognize humans does not operate. So nature thought it would be pretty cool if we just recognized each other. It doesn't mean you're going to take somebody home. It doesn't mean you're going to buy them coffee. Just like, okay, another human, not a snake. I can relax, right? When you see someone who you don't like and they're not very smart from your perspective, that part of the brain does not light up. So literally at unconscious level, there are large groups of people that we don't see as human. They don't belong. And I've written an article about this, basically saying we can't develop effective policy for people that we don't see as people. And in fact, not only does that part of the brain that's not light up, the part of the brain that does light up when we see those people is disgust. So that's a big problem. So in every country, and it's different in every country, because it's cultural. It's what we feed to the unconscious, and what we feed to the unconscious varies from country to country. So this is the background. This is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with these unconscious things that's reflection of our culture and our structure of society. So let's just sort of take a second to define some terms. We talk about equality, and we talk about equity, and inclusion, and then I'm introducing the concept of belonging. And I'll come back to belonging, but as a society, we had a hard time embracing equality with something that we should have afford everybody. And about 20 years ago, we started moving from equality to think about equity. And equity basically said, when people are situated differently, it's not fair necessarily to give people who are situated differently the same thing. Equality, in a narrow sense, suggests treat everybody the same. But that's actually not what we want to do. We don't want to treat everybody the same. And just looking around the room to get a quick take, I'll do this. I may not have enough of them, but if you have glasses on, take them off. Now I want you to look at the board, you're not even try, huh? Okay. Now I want you to take your glasses and give them to the person next to you. And you put them on. Now look at the board. Okay, we're going to treat everybody the same. We're going to make a rule that for the next hour, no glasses, right? Okay, that doesn't make sense, right? Because it doesn't make sense to say that no glasses when some people need glasses, some people don't need glasses, and people need different glasses. So we basically say we move to equity and a concept of which I won't go into in great detail here, called targeted universalism, but it's recognizing that people are situated differently and we don't want to treat everybody the same. So an inclusion, again, everybody's here. Belonging is actually a different feel. Belonging basically says that the thing that you belong to, you co-create. So you're not just joining something, you actually participate in the creation of the thing you're joining. So it actually requires a deeper connection. It also requires power. Oftentimes there's something in place and we say, we want to invite this group to join. And the group may join, it may not join, but it may feel, even if it joins, it may feel like, it's not really my thing. This is your party, this is your house, this is your thing, and you're asking me to join. But the norms, the rules, the culture is already fixed. Still included, but not included to co-create. And some of you may know that if two people get married, in marriage counseling, they say if you have a house and your new respective spouse have a house, don't move into either house. It's a problem. Because even when we love someone, and if you marry someone, the presumption is you love them, maybe not. But you say, okay, come live in my house, sweetie. I'm glad to be here. The furniture was here before you. And the closet, they're already full. But I did save a space for you down in the basement where you can put your stuff. And so it's like the person is like, they're not going to feel it, right? It's like, it's not my house. And so what marriage counselors say is try to get a place where you can co-create a thing that you can build together. So that's what belonging is about. I'll come back to that in a minute. We'll try again to show a video, and I don't know if this will work. Haven't been having a whole lot of success. Of all the forces shaping politics and power around the world, perhaps none are more important than our sense of who we are and who we are becoming. Now it's playing on my computer, so come on up. Of all the forces shaping politics and power around the world, perhaps none are more important than our sense of who we are and who we are becoming. We are in a period of accelerated change in at least 4 areas: globalization, technology, the environment, and demographic change. We can only process so much change in a short period of time without experiencing anxiety, which is a normal biological reaction. But how we respond to this anxiety is social. Our response is greatly shaped by the stories presented by leadership and through culture. These stories speak to our deepest values and our core beliefs about who we are, many of which operate at the subconscious level. We can respond to these changes either as a threat or as an opportunity. The first response is breaking. The second is bridging. Breaking can create a deep fear of other groups, making it easier to accept false stories of us versus them. Breaking perpetuates isolation, hardens racism, and builds oppressive systems, while driving our politics and institutions toward anti-democratic and inhumane practices. The other response is bridging, which calls on us to imagine a larger, more inclusive we. When we bridge, we see demographic change and our diverse identities as positive and enhancing who we are. Bridging calls on us to engage in healthy dialogue and requires us to listen deeply. Bridging does not mean abandoning your identity. Bridging means acknowledging our shared humanity, rejecting that there is a them, and moving toward a future where there is instead a new us. For when we bridge, we not only open up to others, we also open up to changes within ourselves, where we can participate in creating a society built on belonging. So this is the heart of the message today, and that is, how do you build belonging? And again, belonging doesn't mean that you give up your identity. It's a shared identity. And the process of building a belonging society is a process of bridging. And you heard this morning from our Native brothers and sisters. How do you bridge? And instead, oftentimes what we do is we break. We say that the other is a threat. And when we break, terrible things happen. Then it's like we have to build walls, we have to exclude them, we have to contain them in some way. Somehow the group becomes seen as a threat. And we see this happening all around the world now, breaking, not just at the interpersonal level, but at the deepest level, also in terms of government and structures, is happening all over. So the way that we bridge is actually by engaging in each other's stories, by listening to each other, by creating empathetic space and empathetic practice. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about what's sacred to you. Tell me about what you care about. Let's tell a very quick story about Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was in prison 27 years. When he was in prison, there were riots in Soweto, which is the largest black township in South Africa. And part of the riots was because the Afrikaner said that the children going to school had to learn Afrikaner. They had to learn the language of the dominant culture. We've had some practice like that in the United States as we think about Native children or other children. They have to learn the dominant culture, even though that culture was an oppressive culture. And so people in Soweto were rioting. While in prison, Nelson Mandela asked the prison guards to teach him Soweto. To teach him Afrikaner. He asked them to teach them their language. And when he got out of prison, he met with the head of the president of South Africa about having a ceasefire because they were at war. And he said, let's see if we can work this out without killing each other, literally continuing to kill each other. And the president said, I'm open to it, but you have to convince the head of the military in South Africa. The head of the military was white. He believed that whites were superior. He believed that people of African descent were inferior and could not govern. And he also believed that the army, the white army, could defeat the black insurgents. So he didn't want to have this meeting, but he had it anyway. And the meeting took place at Nelson Mandela's house. And the general came in and sat down on the couch, and in front of the couch was a coffee table. And on the other side of the coffee table were a number of chairs. Mandela comes in, the general's sitting on the couch. Now remember, this guy is an explicit, not implicit, an explicit racist. So Nelson Mandela comes in and sits on the couch next to the general. And the general was like, oh man, I'm not feeling this. And so Nelson Mandela says, would you like some tea? And the general says, yes. Nelson Mandela, who has servants, gets up, goes into the kitchen, and prepares the general tea, brings it to him. Instead of making the general comfortable, this is really messing with the general. And so the general says, you know what? Let's get on what I'm here for. Let's talk about this possible ceasefire. And Nelson Mandela says, fine. The entire conversation takes place in Afrikaner. The general leaves the house, and he's completely discombobulated. And he says, I don't like this Nelson Mandela guy, but he can convince anyone of anything. So he agrees to the ceasefire. When Nelson Mandela died, there's a movie about some of this called Electives. When Nelson Mandela died, the general asked Nelson Mandela's family, could he do a eulogy? And the family, this general has killed thousands of people, right? The family reluctantly agrees. He gives a eulogy for Nelson Mandela in Xhosa, which is Nelson Mandela's native language. By some accounts, this exchange saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Nelson Mandela was bridging. He was recognizing the general's sacred symbols. The language was important to the general. And most of us aren't Nelson Mandela, but Nelson Mandela knew what he was doing. He was bridging. Instead, what most people do, and most governments do, is we break. Something happens and we attack the other. And as we see climate migration, which is speeding up in the world, we see people moving all over the world. These people, it's like, who are these people coming to our shores? We see something else happening. This is a map of strong democracy, or full democracies in the world, which is the dark blue. Notice the United States is not dark blue. And the light blue, which represents the United States, is represented as a flawed democracy. And partially flawed because we have not created a space where everybody belongs. And 10 years ago, we would have been dark blue. So these processes that are changing in the world is creating this anxiety. And what's happening, based on the stories, based on the culture, we're saying, be afraid. The future is coming, be afraid. So when you see these reaction, these breaks that are coming from these authoritarian governments, there's an interesting storyline. They say, be afraid of the future, go back to the past. So the story is always, we're going to go back and make when America was great, or when Russia was great, or when Brazil was great. Now this is a fiction, but who are they talking to? Well, I'll tell you who they're talking to. They're not talking to the front of the brain. They're not talking to the consciousness. They're talking to the unconscious, which is called the lizard part of the brain. The oldest part of the brain is called the lizard part of the brain. So when my students and they're telling stories, I say, they give me facts and figures, and the unconscious is not interested in facts and figures. I said, talk to the lizard. You got to convince the lizard. So as you tell stories and practices, I'm not saying facts are unimportant, but we have to do it in such a way that we engage the heart and the lizard. What you see in these dots is examples of white nationalists engaging in violence. If you look at the United States, over the last several years, violence by white nationalists far exceed violence by Muslim terrorists. And yet still, so who's the wall for? Mexico should be building a wall. Canada should be building a wall, protect themselves from the white nationalists. But instead, what we want to do is suggest a circle where everyone belongs, what we call the circle of human concern. We would even extend that beyond just humans. No, I'm not going to show it. I've learned my lesson. So there are two global visions. One of them is a hierarchical, small we. Only these people really count. And everybody else is a visitor. Everybody else is a stranger. Everybody else has to adopt. And you see this not just happening in the United States, you see it happening all over the world. You see it happening in Britain, you see it happening in France, you see it happening. It's this notion that we are the only real people and everybody else is a threat and has to be contained. There's a good book called Savage Inequality, saying that the West sort of learned this notion of breaking and the extreme other through the way it treated native populations all around the world, and extended it in terms of slavery. So if you go back and look at something like Dred Scott, which was a case decided in 1857 before the Civil War, the question was, could blacks ever be part of this country? And the US Supreme Court Chief Justice Taney said no. He said whether blacks were free or enslaved, they could never be full part of the United States. They could never belong. And to some extent, that is the question that we're facing today, is that can we have a country in which everybody belongs? The other story is a connected we, recognizing that not only are we large, we're all interconnected with each other and with the earth itself. And so these are the two competing visions. How we tell the story, how we practice the story matter. And so one requires, to create this large we have to bridge, we have to listen. We've heard this morning, we have to listen, engage, organize, and love. And those are words that don't often come up in our public discourse. We're much more comfortable being hateful than being loving. And we haven't practiced that loving muscle very often. And so I want to be clear that when we talk about belonging or addressing the problem of othering, the solution is not saming. We don't say we're going to address othering by making everybody the same. How do we actually create a space where we belong, where people actually can have their own identities and still belong? That's the challenge. And that challenge is reflected not just in terms of how we treat each other interpersonally, but how we organize our structure and our resources as well. Now, when we other people, it has consequences. And those consequences can be quite severe, and I'll come back to that at the end of the presentation. So what I want to suggest now is, how do you as an organization engage in bridging? How do you, Liz talked about this is about relationships. So what kind of relationship? Do you have a bridging relationship? Do you have a breaking relationship? Do you have a relationship with each other? And again, in a deep way, if you're talking about bridging and belonging, it means co-creating. It's not that you have the answer and you're taking it to somebody. It's actually you're inviting them to participate. And I would say this is the issue. So yeah, housing, schools, jobs, all these things matter. But if we learn to really belong, if we practice belonging and bridging, all those other things become very solvable. Without belonging, all of those things become very intractable. Now, when I talk about bridging, oftentimes people, they feel like, I'm not Nelson Mandela. I'm not going to sit down with the person who's committing murder in my community and serve them tea. I get that. So I say start with short bridges. Don't start with the most difficult. And there's Reverend McBride, who's a well-known Black minister in the Bay Area. When I took this to him, his first reaction was, I get it, John, but do I have to bridge with the devil? And my response was, don't start there. But be careful who you call the devil. Start with short bridges. Start with things that are easier to do. Don't start off with the most difficult. Sometimes when we raise the most difficult, it's really an excuse not to do anything. And so Washington is a diverse state. There are going to be some people who want to bridge but don't know how. There are going to be some people who feel like, I'm not bridging with you. I'm not, you're not fully human. I express that in my practice and my policies, and I don't want to be in a relationship with you. Okay, don't start there. Start with the people who actually want to bridge but maybe don't know how. This is Rwanda. I just gave a talk at Gates about this. Rwanda had, by some accounts, the worst genocide of the 20th century in per capita in the world, worse than Germany. Now, sort of interesting. So genocide is an extreme expression of breaking, when you literally say, I'm going to kill whoever you are, not just you personally. I'm going to kill your nation. I'm going to kill your race. I'm going to kill your tribe. And those of you who follow the Rwanda story, it's disturbing and interesting all at the same time. Because people oftentimes break over something like race or language or tribe or nationality. These are breaks that we've gotten comfortable with. We actually naturalize them. Of course they don't get along. They're different races. Really? That's the way you explain this? In Rwanda, the people there, 3 main tribes, but 2 of them engaged heavily in the genocide, the Tutsis and the Hutus. Same race, same tribe, same religion, same culture. What are they fighting about? What's the break? How do they otherize each other? The point is, the way we conceptualize the other or the us is held in stories. It's not held in nature. There's no natural other. We can actually create new others, and we can create new selves, new we's. And they found a way to make others of people who were the same race, same religion, same culture, same family. And the genocide, which was horrendous, was personal. most of the killings took place by hand, not by gun, but by hand, by machete, chopping up members of people who have been in your family. So it's hard to imagine more extreme breaking than that. That was 25 years ago. So now, thousands of people are getting out of prison who committed genocide. How do they respond to it? They're bridging. They're saying, welcome back home. You are a part of us. And they're doing it on a national level. So again, it's something for us to learn from. We have all had suffering at each other's hands. And sometimes we think, therefore, we can't go forward together. And the Rwandans, at least, are making a valiant attempt to bridge across some of the most difficult terrains imaginable. So what can we learn from them? The way we organize money, wealth, poverty, can sometimes make these bridges more difficult. So we have to actually begin to address issues of both wealth and poverty. So I've been talking about belonging, and even though I've been talking about the unconscious, many of you are number crunchers. And so there are ways of measuring belonging. It's not just, sort of woo-woo stuff. We actually can measure whether someone belongs, and we can actually do practices to make them belong. Some of you will recognize this as Maslow's hierarchy. He argued that the third most important need, the most important needs or the most basic needs start at the bottom. So physiology, safety, and the third is belonging. By some accounts, his hierarchy needs need to be redrawn because belonging actually is about safety. One reason that we belong evolutionary is that if you didn't belong, if you didn't have a group, you didn't survive. And one reason people actually move to groups is for very survival. So it's something that's really needed at the most base level. What we have as a country, and not just as a country, this is out of the UK, we have a society where not belonging, being isolated, being other, is extreme. So in the UK, they created a minister of loneliness. They estimate that 20% of the people in England are disconnected and lonely. The United States numbers are probably very similar, maybe even higher. And I'll come back to this in a minute, but this actually is a serious health problem. People feeling lonely, people feeling other, people feeling not like they belong. It has very serious consequences. And as I was reading last night, thinking about today, reading all of these medical reports, they say, this is a bigger problem, and I'll come back to this, than alcoholism, a bigger problem than drugs, a bigger problem than obesity, and yet medically, we almost have no intervention. It's like, it's a problem, and every medical journal will say it's a problem, and then move on to prescribing a pill or prescribing a drug in terms of actually dealing with the underlying issue. And the underlying issue is complex. We live in complex systems. One of our complex systems that we live in is called our body. Our body is very complex, but we also work in complex system called our organization. And we also have a geography that's complex. So how do we actually hold all these things together? And I don't have time or space to talk to you about complex adaptive systems, except to say they're complex and they adapt. What that really means is that when you make a single intervention, it's a good chance, not invariably, but it's a good chance that intervention will miss the mark. And so you have a problem, if it's part of a complex problem, and you make a single intervention, something happens called negative feedback, that the systems adapt, and it continues to produce the negative outcomes that you thought you were going to correct. Let me give you two quick examples. Massachusetts was one of the first states to adopt quasi-universal health insurance. And in doing so, there was a discussion back and forth as to whether or not they should focus on Blacks and Latinos in Massachusetts because they were underserved. By far, they're underserved. And Governor Romney was there, and they decided not to focus on those groups. They said, we don't have to, because if we make health care insurance available to everyone, those communities will benefit at a disproportionate rate because they are underinsured as a disproportionate rate. So they created health insurance that essentially was available to almost everybody. And as a result of that, the health delivery system and the health gap between whites and people of color increased, not decreased, increased. And people were shocked. It's like, wait a minute, we just spent millions of dollars making sure that Blacks and Latinos have health insurance, and the problem got worse. Why? Does anyone have any idea why it got worse? What? Very close, very close. So you have a complex system, and they're thinking people are not seeing their healthcare providers because they don't have insurance, so that's part of it. But once they made everybody having healthcare insurance, what they did is that they created greater demand across the system, but particularly in the more white, affluent communities, and they pulled healthcare workers out of the Black and Latino community because, and so now you had insurance, but you didn't have access. And it never was just having insurance. It's like, you have pneumonia, take this insurance and go to bed, you'll feel better tomorrow. So the insurance was part of a larger system. And you can look at a lot of systems like that, and we've seen this happen over and over again. People make interventions on a single indicator, and things get worse. So the thing is, it's like you have to understand how systems work. And you're part of, healthcare is an incredibly complex system, and you're trying to produce these outcomes. And most of us are driven into a particular silo, a particular practice, and we're frustrated because as hard as we work, things are only getting marginally better. Again, so the message is you need to understand the system. So again, not belonging has a worse impact on our health than smoking, drinking, obesity. So we have all these campaigns on smoking, I support them, all these campaigns on drinking, drugs, important, obesity. Robert Wood Johnson alone has spent over $1 billion trying to reduce obesity. And they're failing miserably. If you go back to 1990, there was not one state in the United States that had over 20% of the people being obese. By 2010, there wasn't one state that did not have over 20% obesity. And in the midst of that, literally, people are spending billions of dollars trying to address obesity. And they asked me, Robert Johnson asked me to come in and talk to them about this problem. And I said, sure, I'm happy to. And it's more extreme in the Black community. And something occurred to me. So in 20 years, we went from no state to every state. And they're saying, we got to get people out to exercise more. We got to get people to eat less food. And to me, as a researcher, that made no sense at all. I mean, yes, I'm for exercise. I try to swim. I don't always do it, but I try. I try to walk. I don't always do it, but I try. But I couldn't believe, how is it that essentially 300 million Americans from 1990 all of a sudden collectively decide we're done with exercise. So it's like something else must be going on. And what I found in my research, and the World Health Organization validated this, is that it wasn't simply what we consume, it was the processed food and sugar and starch in the food changed radically between 1990 and 2010. And I went back to Robert Wood Johnson with this research, and I said, you know what? Exercise, people dieting, that's probably not going to drive it. We need to look at the food industry. And they said, Thank you, you can leave now. And what I found out, and this is not a knock on them, I found out that a number of large food industries were on their board. And so that issue was off the table. Now, to their credit, I guess, they said, we want to talk to you again. And I said, we tried talking years ago. They said, we know, but we want to have another conversation. And all I'm really saying is they're looking at a complex system, and the thing that might have been most obvious in terms of individual behavior was actually the wrong focus. So think about health. I just gave a talk in Pennsylvania, which by some accounts is the most hard-hit state by suicide and opioids in the country per capita. I think in absolute numbers is number 2, in per capita numbers is number 1. And so look at this data from 2000 to 2014. And the darker it is, the more suicide and opioid problems there are. So in 2000, very low. 2014, the whole country essentially is dealing with the issue of opioids and drug addiction. Let me just get a show of hands. How many of you, either through your work or your personal relationship, know someone struggling with drugs or opioids now? Look around the room. Everybody. So what happened? It's like, again, it's like the obesity issue. What happened that all of a sudden we went from, not zero, but fairly manageable, to now this national epidemic? So I did some research. And this was for Pennsylvania, so it may not be true for Washington, although I have some data on Washington as well. So here's where the epidemic is worse in Washington. And if you look, the darker it is, the worse the epidemic. And people are trying to make sense of it. So first of all, it's disproportionately in the white community. Now, a lot of health indicators, up to a certain point, track people's socioeconomic status. So if you're very poor, you're not going to see a doctor as often. You're probably not going to have as good sort of some biometric indicators in terms of exercise and all that. So generally speaking, in terms of premature birth, in terms of other things, they follow both SES and also follow education to a certain extent. This is not that. So the group that's disproportionately being affected by this are white, and whites are still economically better off than blacks or Latinos and certainly Native Americans. And it's not just whites, it's men, white men. Remember I showed you earlier in terms of that chart, the group that's actually most revered in our society, in terms of warmth, in terms of intelligence, white men. Now this group's not doing so well. And it's not just white men, they're veterans. Again, the highest proportion, at least in Pennsylvania, and my guess is probably true in Washington, worth looking at it, are veterans. And disproportionately, not exclusively, rural. So what do we know about these white male veterans living in rural Pennsylvania and maybe Washington? First of all, they're isolated. In fact, this epidemic has been called a disease or suicide by despair. That we have large groups of men, not just men, but large groups of men who are feeling disconnected, who are feeling like they don't belong. Which is interesting because it's white men, which is a group that you would think would most likely feel like they belong. Now, if you look at another data set in terms of mass killings, who's most likely to be engaged in mass killings? White men. And when they look at the profile of those men, they're also most likely to be isolated. So it's almost like if you're an isolated white man, you're going to kill somebody or kill yourself. Now look at the treatment. The treatment is almost all prophylactic. It's like rehab. Once you get addicted, and some of this is obviously started from medical prescription, but not all of it. We've actually moved beyond that now. So people get addicted, and it's like, okay, come to our clinic and we'll give you some substitute and you'll feel better. And then we send you back out. Are you connected now? No. I mean, from what I can tell, there's very little effort to say, we see this as a question of despair. Even let's call that, what do we do for the despair? Why is this group feeling so despairing? Why is this group feeling so disconnected? I don't purport to have an answer, but there have been a few programs now that are starting to step into that. Liz talked about going upstream. So don't wait until someone come into your clinic already overdosed in the addiction. We can identify that population now. So again, belonging matters, and it matters big. And I'll just give you one other example, and then I'll start moving toward the close. They did an experiment with rats. And you may wonder, why are they always using rats? Rats are actually quite smart, and we don't like them. So it's like, we don't mind if we cut them up and kill them. But anyway, but rats are actually quite smart. It's actually also very social. So they infected rats, became addicted, and then they put them in an environment where they could get the drug or they could get their regular food, but they put them in an environment where they were isolated. And the rats who were isolated all continued to go back to the addictive drugs. When they took the rats and put them in to an environment where the drugs were available and other food was available, but there's also was a social network, the rats stopped using the drugs. Now, maybe there's a lesson for us in there. But my point is that when you feel othered, when you feel isolated, when you don't belong, it matters. And social connection is more than just having contact with people. It's actually feeling like you belong. It's feeling like you're part of something. And you probably can't read this, but I'll give it to you. But this is just a list of benefits associated medically and otherwise from belonging and not belonging. And it's huge. This is not a complete list. So not to belong is a serious medical issue, and to belong is a serious medical benefit. But there's a wrinkle that I at least want to share with you before I close, and that is a wrinkle about networks. So people need to belong, and one way you can think about belonging is being part of a network. But there's some subtlety here. You have to be in the right network. You heard earlier already about Native American suicide, which continues to be the highest in the country. The medical intervention, by and large, for suicide in the Native community is problematic because it's based largely on individuals. Native American communities, even in the sort of marginalized state that we've hoisted upon them, tend to be more connected socially and more connected physically with the earth than the general population. But the network is what I call a flat network. By that I mean everybody in the network has basically the same social demographic conditions. So now in the network, if something bad happens, there oftentimes is not resiliency, it spreads. And that's what we see in terms of Native American suicide, that when a suicide happens in the community, it's a good chance that someone else in that network will also commit suicide. So the network in this instance is actually populating things in a negative way. They saw the same thing in terms of sexually transmitted disease in the Black community. For Black teenagers who are having sex at the same rate as white teenagers, they're more likely to have sexually transmitted disease. Not because of the individual behavior, but because they're more networked. They have what I call thick networks. So instead of one person knowing one person on either side of them, the network is crisscrossing, which means the disease can travel much faster. So it's important to be connected, but it's also important to be connected in the right network. Last example, think about drugs again. We know that if you're an alcoholic and your network, everybody in your network is alcoholic, you're not getting off alcohol. You're networked, but you network only with other alcoholics. And literally, in those networks, people's like, don't bother going to rehab. I was telling Paul and Emily last night, one of my favorite T-shirts comes from this group. And the T-shirt says, rehab is for quitters. So it's important for people to be connected, but it's also important for them to have the right kind of connections, connections that actually offer resiliency and that can actually help them in terms of the next stage. So I'm going to stop here, and I know there's time for questions. I want to suggest we actually have a number of programs. One of them is called Blueprint for Belonging, which we've done in California, which actually builds out how do you actually help communities create a larger we? How do you help people belong? And we actually got a grant from Blue Cross Foundation to actually do this throughout California. Now we're being asked, can we help bring this to Washington? And it looks like that'll happen as well. My point is that we know that belonging is important. It's like Robert Wood Johnson. We know belonging is important, but we actually haven't turned our attention to figure out what to do about it. We're saying, go out and exercise by yourself. Instead of actually figuring out how to help people connect, how to help communities connect, how to help people build resiliencies and the right kind of networks. And this issue is not just an issue in marginal communities. This issue is an issue that's affecting the whole world. And I would say we get it right, or we actually run the risk of not only losing our communities, but losing our planet. Thank you.
So as you can see, we're over a little bit, but I hope that you'll give us a little bit of time just in case you've got questions. We have a few folks that are somewhat teed up. So I'm going to start with Glenn. Do you mind? All right, hold on.
Let's talk about anything I want. Liz teed me up, so I had actually a chance to think about this. When I last heard John speak and was talking about othering and belonging, it was for the Healthier Washington, which was all the ACHs down in SeaTac a few months ago. And what I've been thinking about a lot since then is from how I'm situated, right? So as a white man, middle class, just to be general, how do I do this work if I don't know what I don't know? How do I bring a level of humility to this work? How do I recognize the power that I have? How do I do things that I don't know how to do? You know, what are the prompts? What are the questions I need to ask myself? What are the ground rules? How do I create authentic relationships if I've been socialized in a way that tells me that the way I look at the world is the right way? So for me, I've just been doing a lot of thinking about what kind of personal practice can I implement for myself? What are things that I can try to do differently to disrupt the way I'm socialized to behave? And part of that, I think, is being a part of a network like this, where I have people around me who will help me and will give me the gift of feedback. Anyway, I'll stop there. I keep talking.
Well, I think that's right. And I think how we, because we have these structures that make it hard for us to relate, right? I mean, the fact that if I want to know someone who's maybe a different race, maybe different, I got to get in my car and drive. And when I get there, I might not get a welcome arms, right? It's like, I'm from Berkeley and I came out here to have breakfast with rural America. I mean, they might not say, well, we don't have cappuccinos out here. But my point is that we actually have to think about how do we create structures, stories, opportunities, and we can do that. But oftentimes when we come together, we're sort of bashing each other. We tell breaking stories. We all have stories about the other. And it could be the racial other, it could be the religious other, it could be the ideological other. How do we actually put a space and curate in such a way that people can actually share? And one way to do it, too, I'll say, Paul and I went for a walk this morning, and Paul was saying that in terms of people's health, it's a place where empathy may be easier to actually curate. So I had a friend who died several years ago named Trina. She's a Black Latino from Cuba. And she talked about, sort of these visions of being Black, of being Latina, of not belonging, and how hard that was for her. And then she got cancer. And she said her salient identity now became that of a person with cancer. And what she sought out across racial lines, across national lines, were other largely women who were struggling with cancer. Now, we don't have to wait for someone to get, we all have stories of suffering. And can we create space where we hear each other's stories empathetically? And the answer is yes. I mean, we're doing this in California. So I think your point, but our daily lives are such that if we just go through our daily lives, they oftentimes leave us largely isolated. And then the other thing I would say is that when we set these tables, and I think you did a really beautiful job this morning, how do you set up so it's not simply you're taking something to a group as a savior, but you're also listening, you're learning. So how do you create that co-creation? What do we have to learn from Native populations, from Black populations, from immigrant populations, from white populations? And how do we actually, again, curate that so we have that experience? We just got a indication we're about to get a $500,000 grant at Berkeley to help students bridge. Because again, the students come there and they've already practiced in their practice that the Black students hang with the Black students, the white students hang with the white students, Latinos hang with, and it's comfortable. But we're not trying to make people just comfortable. We're trying to make people, vibrant, alive, bold. And so I think we have to be deliberate, and I think part of the things you're doing here, and I think what Liz was talking about in terms of building relationship, that's why it's so important. Again, last thing I'll say on this is that at our conference, we had a guy named Neil and a guy named Deshaun from Florida. And some of you may know that Florida just voted to change their constitution so that 1.4 million people who hadn't had the right to vote have the right to vote. And you needed 60% of the electorate to change the Constitution. And there was not one population that represented 60% of the voters, not white, not Black. And so if you're going to pass that, you had to have a relationship between these groups. So Deshaun is African American. He's a returning citizen. He spent time in prison. He lives in urban Florida, and he was a Bernie supporter. And Neil is white, a Trump supporter, returning citizens, lives in rural Florida. The two of them came together. We helped them some in terms of how do you bridge? Because the instinct is you're supporting Bernie, he's a socialist, you're supporting Trump, he's a fascist, I don't want to talk to you. And what they say now, and again, we have this on a video, that they're not just trying to do something tactically, that is win the right to people to vote, they're trying to create a larger we. They're trying to create these bridges. They're trying to create these empathetic spaces. And so they go around Florida together, and they're an unlikely couple, right? When people see them, it's like, ooh, what's going on? So I think that, again, we can be very deliberate. And when we first started, it may feel kind of awkward. It's like when you're learning to dance. When you first learn to dance, it's like, put your foot here, put your foot there. At some point, you forget. You've done it enough. You become practiced enough. It actually becomes a part of you. So the first part of it is going to feel awkward, but after a while, you'll get better.
All right, so I have a question from Sister Susan.
I was interested in your talking about the habits of the mind, and what are the ways that we can disrupt those neural connections that keep us in kind of that status of those implicit biases that cause us to judge people or to make wrong assumptions about other people?
Great question. So there's a lot of, I was contacted by Starbucks, and there had been an incident at Starbucks, as you know. There were a couple of young Black men, they were in Starbucks, and somebody got very uncomfortable that somebody was white, and they called the police, and the police came and arrested them. It's an interesting story, and there have been these stories all over the place. There were some Black people in Oakland at a park, getting ready to have a barbecue. And again, this white woman's walking by, and it's like, ooh, black people going to barbecue, that's dangerous. So she called the police, and the police came, but the police didn't do an arrest. And, you know, and I sort of wonder, what was the call? You know, like, sir, we have an emergency, some black people in Oakland going to a barbecue. Be right there. Is it chicken or is it beef? What Starbucks did, they contacted me and they said they wanted to train, I think it was 80,000 employees in one day to get rid of implicit bias. And I said, just stick to making coffee. No, I said, actually, you can't get rid of bias that way. Bias, the point I made at the beginning is that bias is part of being human. Now, we can push it in one direction or another direction. One of the things that actually affect bias is actually the group of people involved. So if you have all men of the same race, of the same ethnicity, of the same religion, they all have the same blind spots. We all literally have blind spots. And we have collective blind spots. And so when you only hang out with your own group, you all have the same blind spot. And so part of the thing, when done well about diversity, and certainly part of the thing when done well about belonging, is that you're checking each other. You see something that I didn't see. I'll give you one other example. And Starbucks did something better than that, I should say. They started looking at structures. They started looking at, and they gave their employees some protocol. And one protocol was that, first of all, now the rule in Starbucks is that anybody can stay in the store unlimited time, don't have to buy. Also, anyone can use the restroom, which I appreciate because, you know, when I'm driving and I'm getting antsy in the car, and it's like, where's the Starbucks, you know? So it had a personal benefit to me. But a lot of these things happen without our intention. So we can have bias even though we have good intentions. That's the point I was trying to make. And part of creating bridges is not simply to call people out, but to call people in. So a lot of times when we do work on issues around race or gender, whatever, we think, first of all, you got to admit that you're a racist, misogynist, SOB, and then we can have a conversation. And as a friend of mine said, that's a conversation-ending strategy. You know, because most people aren't going to agree to that. I'm not consciously trying to do bad things. I'm not saying I'm not doing bad things. So think about this. You've heard of Siri and Alexa and chat boxes. I was called in by some of the tech companies, and they were saying, we have a problem. We have a multi-billion-dollar industry. The voice on the chat box, more than 95% of the time, is a woman's voice. Think about this. And what's your relationship with the chat box? Well, I'm yelling at it, asking it to do something for me. Sort of reminds me a lot of my relationship with my wife. And sometimes the chatbot gets it wrong. It's like, no, I didn't say, you know, I say, hey, Alexis, what's the weather in Berkeley, which is where I live? The weather in Brooklyn tomorrow? It's like, no, I didn't say Brooklyn. Literally, the companies are saying what that's doing, and they're right, is teaching the unconscious to hold women in less regard. Because the unconscious is not saying, oh, that's just the chat box, that's just the computer. No, the conscious is saying, that's a woman's voice. And they actually literally are saying, we don't know what to do now. Because literally it's a billion-dollar industry, and we know we're actually habits, repetition, we're teaching people to hold women in a demeaning role. To their credit, once they identify it, they should do something about it. But I would say the engineers who designed that from the very beginning were disproportionately men. You know, so you could have thought about it at the front end, but all this like, no, these men are smart, they're this, they're that, you know, they have good values, they're liberal, and yet they all share the same blind spot. So part of what I would say is that create mechanisms and relationships so that we help each other grow, but we also that we can check each other's blind spot.
All right, only because of time, we're going to.
I don't know if you have just one woman here if you want to recognize her.
Okey doke. If you miss your flight, I'm not. We get the last question before lunch.
Thank you. Much appreciation. I'll sit down so folks can see me behind. So we're talking about creating belonging. What that means is like.
Could you hold the mic a little closer to you?
Oh, we're talking about creating belonging. So what that means and what I'm hearing is that we're building bridges, we're building community. And with that, right, one has to have the unique ability to meet folks where they are. And so being in spaces, right, whether it's group, I tend to have like community agreements. I work in a school, spend plenty of times in, right, community conversations. Is there a community agreement? So like, for example, we have like impact over intent, using statements, silence is okay. When in these spaces, right, folks, because we're all in different spaces, tend to take up more space than others. So is there a community agreement that you can like share with us that's important as we build community? Because if I'm referring back to my Native brothers and sisters, they talked about, listening and hearing and not speaking so much, and not everyone's there. So can you impart some community agreements that we could live by and incorporate in our communities?
Yeah. Well, there are, so for those in the back who didn't hear, the question is, are there community agreements in terms of people participating? And the example was that some people take up more space than others, and there may not be an agreement that they're going to listen. And so part of this may be facilitated. There's again, a nuance I want to put in here. I work a lot in the area of social justice, racial justice, but other areas as well. And so oftentimes, just put it out there, there's a sense that white people, and particularly white men, take up a lot of space when in a meeting. And rich people take up a lot of space. As you have more money, the idea is you're smarter. At some point, you almost become as smart as tall people, but never get that. So part of it is just creating norms. Step up, step back. That's one of the things in meetings, but also meetings can be facilitated. So one of the things that was apparently true, that I heard as being true at Standing Rocks, is they had a process where first Native women would speak, then Native men, then, and it kept going out further and further, and so, to eventually everybody could speak. But they would start by saying, how do we center the voices of the people who are most effective? How do we actually deliberately do that? And I would say not just the voices, but how do you actually make sure people have the resources to fully participate? And sometimes that might mean having access to some research material. Sometimes it might be, it's like I go to meetings and say, we can't get the Black people to come to Berkeley. It's like, why would they come to Berkeley? Why don't we go to them? We have more resources than they do. And if you get to Berkeley, you can't park, and parking is expensive. So it's like, can we flip the switch and say, we want to have a meeting, and they won't come to Berkeley because it's $5 to park for an hour, we'll go to them. And to your question also, in terms of co-creating, what do you need to fully participate in this process? And the two things I would end with is this. I don't believe that we should silence anyone. And so it's historically has certainly been true that whites and white men have dominated, but I wouldn't silence white men. I would actually say, how do you participate in the meeting and contribute, but also spend some time listening, spend some time reflecting, spend some time in relationship with people where you're not the expert, you're not the boss, but we don't want you to go away. So that's one, is that how do you create a space where everyone can participate, but lifting up the people who have traditionally been most marginalized and making sure not only their voice, but they have the resources to effectively participate. And secondly, the focus of many of these efforts are on communities that are most marginal. That's good, but incomplete. So I would say we're not trying to fix the Black community, the Native community, rural community. We're trying to fix the whole country. So, so when you elicit stuff from the Native community, it shouldn't be just about their community. It also should be about the overall community. They should have some input into the overall enterprise. They really are co-creating. Now, there may be places where you say, okay, you're better suited to do this than I am, so go for it, or I'm better to suit. But you want to create those spaces where you're co-creating together, and you're co-creating in a large way, not in, we want to fix the central district of Seattle while Amazon is building downtown. It's like we actually want to put all this on the table. And then the last thing I would say is that it may need to be curated. You may need a facilitator who help in terms of, I taught at a university, I still teach at a university, but this is years ago. And when I was teaching, maybe 30 years ago, literally, I asked questions and people raised their hands, and I noticed women did not raise their hands. And when they did raise their hand and I called on them, they'd say something, and literally the men in the audience would be dismissive. And it was even more extreme if you were gay. And so I did two things. I said, I think the class was like 4 days a week. I said on Tuesday and Thursday, men cannot speak. People were pissed. When I say people, I mean men. It's like, that's not fair. It's like, my class, you can go get another class if you want. After about 4 weeks, I opened it up. The women had found their voice, and they were never silent again. With gays, it was very similar. And so when a gay person would say something, it would be, say it. So I started using examples in my lecture where I'd say, me and my boyfriend went and looked for an apartment together, and so, and then I'd tell the story. And I started sprinkling that throughout. What I was doing was extending my power to that group. Gays started being treated much better. And then it ended by 5 students came in my office during office hours, and they said, Professor Powell, the students in the class asked us to come and talk to you. I said, about what? Well, we know it doesn't matter, but they were wondering, they wanted us to ask you if you're gay or straight. I said, okay. I said, what should we tell them? I said, tell them you asked. So you have to do different interventions to make sure that to amplify the voices of those who are oftentimes left out. Thank you.
Great.
I was just told that if you're late, it's not my fault. Can you hear me okay?
So we have a couple of announcements before you go and grab lunch, but I would really, having these 2 sessions this morning, hopefully you can understand why we keep thinking of this as a beginning, because I can imagine you all might love for this conversation to continue. John is going to be here for a while before he takes off to go and catch his flight, and so if folks want to grab him before the afternoon sessions start, I don't know where he'll be, but somewhere. But I do just wanted to, if you all would just join me in thanking both Children of the Setting Sun and John Powell for giving us this message. And I would love for you all to just look around you, because this is the team of people that are going to be carrying this stuff forward. It is actually you. So thank you for being here. We know that some of you are actually going to be departing once you grab your lunch. So we have a couple of announcements before you go. We were trying to figure out, could we do raffle prizes or something insane, but so there are 4 people whose names were randomly chosen by the Hillary random generator outside. We have gifts for you. So that includes Chandra Riedhauer, and I apologize if that's not how you pronounce your name, Mike Hudson, Diane Smith, and Debbie Jones. So if you'll just find me before you go and grab your lunch. Sure. And then Tiffany on our team, where did she go? Just in case anybody doesn't know this, the the linchpin that holds the North Sound ACH together, and very often Liz. But she's got some announcements just like to help you get out the door, get lunch, and what's going to happen coming back in. But, you know, really, those of you that are leaving, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And nobody else gets to leave, just so that we're really clear on that.
Hey there. So if everybody could grab their folder that was provided to them and fill out the blue evaluation. Some folks will have 2 evals, others just have 1, but for now, please fill out just the blue evaluation form. You may leave it on the table or at the registration desk. We have some baskets there. Lunch is just outside the back doors. For anybody that registered with dietary restrictions, the table is to the left with your lunch, and that's where you'll find it. For our guests leaving after this session, please turn in your name tags so we can recycle them and use them again. Oh, okay, there we go, sorry. And then please, for the folks staying, please be back in this room by 1:15. You can come back to eat here or in another room, wherever you're comfortable. Just come back here at 1:15, please. Thank you.
And then the thing I've been doing